Hello everyone. Welcome to Frightening Tales. I know many of you enjoy listening to these videos as you fall asleep. So, before you drift off, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where in the world you're tuning in from. And if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Alright, now let's get comfortable, relax, and dive into tonight's case. Story 1. In October 2010, a man with a tense expression hurriedly disembarked from a plane. Once settled in the taxi, leaving the airport, a triumphant smirk spread across his face. Deep down, he believed he had pulled off a perfect crime. A plan meticulously crafted over months, so airtight that even if the police discovered the two victims lying in a pool of blood, they would be left grasping at straws. Today, we'll unravel the mystery of a case that sent shockwaves through the public. The killer was cunning beyond measure, calculating every move with precision, leaving the investigative team grappling with countless obstacles. If not for a photograph accidentally taken by a police officer over 1,500 kilometers from the crime scene, this case might truly have remained a perfect crime with no resolution. The tragedy unfolded in Perth, the capital of Western Australia. Despite being Australia's fourth largest city, Perth is often dubbed the loneliest city in the world due to its isolated geographical location thousands of kilometers away from other major urban centers. In recent years, the Chinese community here has grown significantly with an influx of Asian restaurants, supermarkets, and high-quality educational institutions attracting many Chinese immigrants to settle in the area. It was in this seemingly peaceful city that the dark events of this story took place. Sun Dan and Xiaonhua, a Chinese couple, lived in the affluent Mandarin suburb of Perth. Their comfortable lifestyle wasn't the result of high-paying jobs, but rather the immense wealth of Xiaonhua's family. His mother, Song Taipei, was the head of a major construction conglomerate in China, while his father held a position as a government official. Rumors even circulated that Xiaonhua's uncle was a high-ranking official, meaning Xiaonhua grew up in a family of wealth and influence. Like many elite Chinese families, Xiaonhua's parents placed great emphasis on education. They sent their son to study in Australia, purchasing a lavish villa in Mandarin for him to live in. It was there through a family introduction that he met Sun Dan, a young woman from Luoyang, China. Born in 1983, she was 4 years younger than Xiaonhua. Though she didn't come from a prestigious family like her husband, Sun Dan still enjoyed a relatively comfortable life. She had come to Australia as an international student, carrying dreams and aspirations for a brighter future. Their meeting and subsequent romance felt almost inevitable. In a foreign land, finding a compatriot who shared the same language and culture was a rare comfort. Moreover, Xiaonhua was strikingly handsome and Sun Dan was breathtakingly beautiful. They quickly fell in love and tied the knot in April 2008 at the Perth Exhibition Centre in a lavish wedding that left their friends in awe. After their marriage, the young couple led a life of luxury. Backed by the immense wealth of Xiao's family, they never had to worry about money. They frequently traveled together, indulged in extravagant dinners, and lived a dreamlike, blissful existence. Their happiness seemed to double when in 2009, they welcomed their first child, a daughter named Chi-Chi. Chi-Chi's arrival brought boundless joy to both families. Song Taipei, Xiaonhua's mother, was particularly elated, immediately flying to Australia to help her son care for her granddaughter. However, her presence marked the beginning of a turbulent new chapter, the classic clash between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. At first, their cohabitation went smoothly, but tensions soon began to surface between the couple. Both Xiaonhua and Sun Dan were only children, spoiled from a young age, which made them somewhat selfish and unwilling to compromise. With Chi-Chi's birth, their lives became busier and more stressful, leading to frequent arguments. Songtape's interference in their personal lives only exacerbated the conflict. She consistently took her son's side, leaving Sun Dan feeling isolated and alone in her own home. By April 2010, the family conflict had reached a breaking point. The marriage was beyond saving and Sun Dan and Xiaonhua began the process of divorce. Sun Dan decided to leave the villa in Mandalay, taking her daughter Chi-Chi to rent a small apartment in Baila, a suburb north of Perth. She even took Chi-Chi back to China for a while to escape the mounting tension. But the real tragedy struck when Chi-Chi was kidnapped in Shenyang, China. Sun Dan was on the verge of collapse when she discovered that her daughter's passport and identification documents had also vanished. She immediately realized there was only one person who could be behind this: Xiaonhua. Left with no other choice, she sought help from the Australian embassy and Chinese diplomatic authorities. After exhaustive efforts, they discovered that Xiaonhua had secretly brought Chi-Chi back to Perth. Sun Dan hurriedly flew to Australia to reclaim custody of her daughter. Her mother, Kong Jashim, also decided to travel to Perth to support her daughter and granddaughter. However, Xiaonhua's family wasn't willing to let go so easily. They repeatedly used the excuse of visiting their granddaughter to take Chi-Chi to their home for a few days before returning her to her mother. The battle for custody between the two sides raged on. On the surface, it seemed like a typical divorce scenario, two parents fighting over custody with a court ruling likely on the horizon. But in reality, events were veering down a far darker path, one steeped in tragedy and bloodshed. On September 30, 2010, Chi-Chi had been picked up by her paternal grandmother early that morning to spend the day with her. Around 7:30 p.m., Sun Dan and her mother drove back to their apartment. As their car pulled into the garage, a white Mitsubishi suddenly sped forward, blocking their path and cutting off any chance of retreat. At the same moment, a silver Mercedes roared in, forming a pincer-like trap. Sensing the danger, Sun Dan's mother, Kong Jashin, immediately stepped out of the car to investigate. But before she could react, a mysterious man charged at her, swinging a sledgehammer with brutal force directly at her head. Against the assailant's muscular build, Kong was utterly defenseless. In an instant, she collapsed, lying motionless in a pool of blood. The man then drew a dagger and advanced toward Sun Dan, who was still inside the car. Terrified, she screamed for help, but her cries went unanswered. The attacker brandished the knife, stabbing her repeatedly in a frenzied assault. Within moments, blood splattered everywhere, turning the car's interior into a scene of sheer horror. After committing the act, the killer swiftly jumped into one of the vehicles, and both cars sped away from the scene. Not long after, neighbors noticed something was terribly wrong and immediately called the police. Emergency responders arrived quickly, but it was Too late for Sun Dan. She had succumbed to her severe injuries. Kong Jashin, her face disfigured from the attack, was barely clinging to life. After emergency treatment, she narrowly escaped death. But doctors warned that she faced the risk of becoming permanently vegetative. The Perth police launched an immediate investigation. They recovered a blood-stained sledgehammer at the scene, but the killer had clearly planned the attack meticulously, wearing gloves to avoid leaving any fingerprints or other traceable evidence. Given the well-known animosity between Sun Dan and Xiaonhua, coupled with their ongoing divorce, the police quickly identified Xiaonhua as a suspect with a clear motive. The very next morning, they arrived at his home to question him. However, Xiao was not in Australia at the time of the crime. Only his mother and young Chi-Chi were present at the house. When questioned by the police, Xiaonua's mother calmly stated, "My son returned to China on September 11 to visit family and hasn't come back since." The police verified immigration records and confirmed that Xiaonhua had indeed left Australia on September 11 and had not returned. This gave him a seemingly airtight alibi. So, if not Xiaonhua, who else had a reason to carry out such a brutal attack on Sun Dan? With no other immediate suspects, the police continued to investigate the victims' personal relationships. Their findings revealed that Sun Dan led a modest life running a small nail salon. Apart from caring for her daughter and studying English, she had few friends and no known conflicts with anyone. The only person she had a dispute with was Xiaonhua. Despite his alibi, all suspicion pointed squarely at him. The police began to suspect that he might have hired someone to kill his wife. Digging deeper, the police uncovered that Xiaonhua was not as unassuming as he appeared. On the surface, he was a low-paid security guard, often seen patrolling the neighborhood with his German Shepherd. But in reality, he owned 2 companies, 3 properties, and a silver Mercedes coupe, the exact description of one of the 2 cars spotted at the crime scene. This wealth aligned perfectly with his identity as a spoiled rich kid. Sun Dan was well aware of her husband's vast fortune, which is why during the divorce proceedings, she repeatedly demanded custody of their daughter, alimony, and a fair division of assets. Viewed through this lens, Xiaonua's motive became glaringly apparent. To avoid splitting his wealth, he had decided to eliminate his wife. Additionally, the police discovered that Xiaonhua had a questionable connection to an adult massage parlor on Beaufort Street. He was a frequent visitor and had a close relationship with the parlor's owner, raising suspicions that he might be involved in the establishment's illicit activities. However, the owner insisted they were merely friends and had no business dealings together. Regardless of whether Xiaonhua was tied to illegal operations, the police couldn't rule out the possibility that he was the mastermind behind the murder. The greatest challenge now was to either dismantle Xiao's alibi or track down the direct perpetrator. The police meticulously reviewed surveillance footage from the area where the crime occurred. They managed to capture images of the 2 suspicious vehicles, but due to poor lighting conditions at night, the cameras only recorded the general shapes of the cars, unable to clearly identify the drivers' faces. From the footage, the white Mitsubishi had been spotted multiple times near the area in the days leading up to the murder, lingering there for over 2 hours on the night of the attack, as if waiting for Sun Dan to appear before striking. It was evident that this was a carefully orchestrated assassination. However, beyond the details of the two cars, the surveillance footage offered no further critical clues. Meanwhile, Sundan's mother remained in a deep coma, leaving the investigation at a dead end. The police decided to arraign Xiaonua's mother, Song Taipei, in hopes of gleaning more information. But to their surprise, on October 11, 2010, she had secretly taken Chi back to China, severing all contact with the authorities. With no other options, the police released the surveillance footage to the public, hoping that someone might provide a lead. The strategy quickly paid off. A citizen recognized the silver Mercedes in the video as a 2003 Mercedes CLK 500, a rare model with only 20 such cars registered in Western Australia. After tracing the vehicle, the police confirmed that the car in the surveillance footage belonged to Xiao Nu. They immediately seized the vehicle, but this did not yield any significant breakthroughs in the case. At this point, the Perth police found themselves in a dilemma. They knew Xiaonua was the prime suspect, but he had fled to China, making it impossible to summon him for questioning. Moreover, his seemingly irrefutable alibi prevented the police from obtaining an arrest warrant or requesting assistance from Chinese authorities to apprehend him. During the subsequent investigation, the adamantly denied all allegations, boldly declaring, "I plan to settle permanently in China and have no intention of returning to Australia." This statement pushed the case into a dead end. Unable to pursue further investigation against Xiaonua directly, the police shifted their focus to the mysterious white Mitsubishi seen at the crime scene and the elusive killer. After conducting a wide-scale search, the police found no white Mitsubishi in the area linked to the crime. This led to a bold hypothesis. The perpetrator might have come from a distant location and the car might not be local. As previously mentioned, Perth is an isolated city, with the nearest major urban centers thousands of kilometers away. If Xiaonua had hired an assassin from another city, instructing them to drive thousands of kilometers to Perth to kill Sundan and then leave immediately, it would indeed be a chillingly perfect plan. Following this lead, the police uncovered a critical clue. On September 24, Xiaonua had placed an ad in a Chinese-language newspaper in Sydney seeking a driver for a long distance ANZ trip from Sydney to Perth. This detail was highly suspicious. Hadn't Xiaonua left Australia for China on September 11? If so, why was he hiring a driver on September 24? Furthermore, the murder took place on September 30, just 6 days later. The police decided to investigate the route from Sydney to Perth, a journey spanning over 3,900 kilometers. This route cuts through vast deserts and plains, making it one of the most desolate stretches in Australia. One particular section passes through the Nullary Plain, often called the treeless land due to its barren landscape. It was here that an unexpected breakthrough emerged. A highway patrol officer named Robert recalled that on the night of September 30, while patrolling the Nullary Highway, he had pulled over a white car. What struck him as odd was that just a few days earlier, the same car had been traveling toward Perth and now it was heading back in the opposite direction. Robert found this highly unusual, as driving on this route is far from easy. He had taken photos of the two men in the car and noted the encounter in his routine patrol report. He later forgot about the incident until the Perth police reached out for assistance in their investigation. The moment the police received the photo, the veil of mystery was lifted because in the image, the man in the passenger seat was none other than Xiaonue. This confirmed the police's theory. Xiaonue had deliberately created a false alibi by leaving Australia for China on September 11th, but he had secretly returned to Sydney, hired a driver to travel to Perth on September 24th, and hidden at his mother's house for a few days to prepare the murder weapons. He then carried out the killing of Sun Dan on September 30th before fleeing Perth that same night, returning to Sydney and flying back to China. At this point, the police were no longer concerned with how he had re-entered Australia, as there were two likely possibilities. Either he used a fake passport or he had entered illegally. Armed with irrefutable photographic evidence, the police quickly obtained a warrant to search Xiao's home. They discovered that on his laptop, his gaming account had logged in on September 29th and 30th. Even more damning, the laptop's webcam had captured footage of Xiaonue sitting in front of the computer in the early hours of September 29th. This proved that he was hiding in his mother's house at the time. Consequently, his mother's claim that she hadn't seen her son since he returned to China was a blatant lie. The police continued to trace airport records in Sydney to determine how Xiao had illegally re-entered Australia. After a meticulous review, they confirmed that he had used the passport of a friend surnamed Yu, who had been a groomsman at his wedding. Due to their similar facial features and Xiao's use of a disguise, he had easily slipped past immigration officials. With this solid evidence in hand, the Perth police collaborated with Chinese authorities to arrest Xiaonue. Prior to this, without compelling evidence, Xiaonue had been living freely in China beyond the reach of the law. The Chinese police had no record of his crimes, so they couldn't detain him. It was only after his illegal entry using a fake passport was uncovered that they were able to hold him temporarily and launch an investigation. In May 2014, after receiving irrefutable evidence from the Australian police, Xiaonue was officially charged with the murder of his wife and the attempted murder of his mother-in-law. However, the trial process proved to be incredibly complex. The complication arose because Xiaonue held Australian citizenship while Sun Dan was a Chinese citizen. This created a rare legal situation. An Australian citizen had killed a Chinese citizen on Australian soil. Although China and Australia had signed an extradition treaty in 2007, Australia had never ratified it. As a result, there was no legal basis to extradite Xiao back to Australia for trial. The Australian government hoped China would extradite him, but under Chinese criminal law, if a foreigner commits a serious crime outside China and the victim is a Chinese citizen, China has the right to prosecute the case. Australia initially opposed this decision as the country had abolished the death penalty long ago and consistently advocated for other nations to do the same. They were concerned that if Xiao were tried in China, he might face the death penalty. After several tense rounds of diplomatic negotiations, the two countries reached a landmark agreement. No matter how heinous Xiaonue's crimes, he would not face the death penalty. In May 2014, the Shanghai No. 1 Intermediate People's Court opened the trial of Xiaonue. With irrefutable evidence provided by Australian authorities and the thorough investigation conducted by Chinese police, Xiaonue was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment under Chinese law. Curiously, However, this verdict was not publicly announced until 2016. Regarding the motive, the judge concluded that Xiaonhua, unwilling to accept the divorce and fearful of losing his vast fortune in custody of his daughter, had orchestrated the murder of his wife. The case unfolded at a time when China and Australia had not yet formalized an extradition treaty, but the two nations collaborated closely to successfully resolve the case. This marked not only a breakthrough in judicial cooperation between the two countries, but also provided valuable experience in investigating and handling transnational crimes. On September 23, 2016, nearly 6 years after Sundan's murder, an unexpected twist unfolded at Perth Airport. Song Taipei, Xiaonhua's mother, was arrested by Australian police the moment she stepped off the plane. Although the primary perpetrator had already faced justice, Song Taipei was suspected of providing false testimony during the investigation. She had previously claimed to the police with unwavering confidence that her son had returned to China and never came back to Australia. In reality, Xiaonhua had secretly re-entered the country using a fake passport, hiding in their Perth home for days before killing Sundan. Song Taipei clearly knew the truth. Beyond giving false testimony, Australian police also accused her of being an accomplice in Sundan's murder. Facing these serious charges, Song Taipei vehemently denied any involvement, asserting that she had no part in her son's crime. Her defense lawyer argued that if Xiaonhua had gone to such lengths to conceal his identity and re-enter Australia secretly, it would be illogical for him to inform his family in Perth before committing the murder. However, the trial proceedings for Song Taipei later faded into obscurity and her final verdict remains a mystery. Many questioned why she would risk returning to Australia after so many years. One theory emerged. She may have intended to secretly take her granddaughter Chi-Chi out of Australia. After the case concluded, Chi-Chi, an Australian citizen, was brought back to Australia by the government and placed in the care of the Department of Social Welfare. If Song Taipei had indeed returned to Australia to take Chi-Chi away, she had been gravely naive. She might have assumed the case had faded into obscurity and that the police were no longer watching her, but she was apprehended the moment she landed. After some time under the care of the Department of Social Welfare, Chi-Chi found a new home with a compassionate couple. It's said that this couple occasionally takes Chi-Chi to China to visit her maternal grandparents. As for Xiaonhua's vast fortune in Australia, what happened to it after he was sentenced to life in prison? The answer is straightforward. Since Chi-Chi is his legal heir, Xiaonhua's assets naturally passed to her. The Australian government auctioned off a portion of his estate, establishing a trust fund to secure Chi-Chi's future. Tragically, Sundan's mother, Kong Zhen, despite undergoing extensive and costly treatments, never recovered. She remains permanently disabled, unable to care for herself. Reflecting on this case, Xiaonhua had deluded himself into believing he had devised a perfect plan to escape justice after committing his crime. But he overlooked one crucial truth. No matter how meticulously planned, there's always a flaw. As the saying goes, the net of justice may be wide, but it never lets the guilty slip through. The law always finds a way to bring perpetrators to account. This case exposed gaps in judicial cooperation between the two countries. Story 2. A bustling shopping center suddenly thrown into chaos by a violent riot. A frenzied mob surrounds a lone individual, unleashing a barrage of punches and kicks without mercy. Even a teenage girl who appears frail at first glance shows no hesitation, repeatedly chasing after the victim to deliver more blows. In this savage assault, a middle-aged man, his face covered in blood, staggers and collapses. Moments later, he falls lifeless to the ground. Blood pooling around him, staining the floor crimson. This case is a tragic incident that once rocked Singapore to its core. A kind-hearted, respected chemist was brutally attacked by a group of 6 men and 1 woman, leading to his untimely death. And among the perpetrators was a stunning social media influencer, a so-called hot girl. Since her arrest, countless netizens have rallied to her defense, demanding her release, propelling the case into the spotlight and sparking intense public debate. The Orchard Towers, also known as Tower, stands at 400 Orchard Road in Singapore. Constructed at a cost of 35 million Singapore dollars, it opened its doors in 1975. The grand, 1,486 square meter cinema on the 4th floor was once a symbol of luxury in the area. But over time, it was replaced by the Top 10 nightclub, and the building's reputation took a darker turn. It became notorious as a place where, as some described, you might catch passionate interactions between men and women right in the lobby. It was within this chaotic environment that the story we're about to uncover took place. At around 6:25 a.m. on July 2, 2019, just as dawn was breaking, John, the owner of a small area on the 1st floor of Orchard Towers, was startled awake by a loud scream. Peering outside, he was horrified to see a man covered in blood clutching his stomach, collapsing in front of his shop. A crowd had gathered. Some were calling the police, others were shouting to catch the culprit, while a few simply stood by watching the commotion unfold. Minutes later, an ambulance arrived and paramedics rushed the victim to the hospital for emergency treatment. Tragically, their efforts were in vain. By 7:30 a.m., the man had passed away. A forensic examination revealed the grim details. The victim had 3 stab wounds to his lower jaw and neck, a hematoma on the back of his head, and numerous bruises across his body. The fatal injury was a deep cut to his neck where a sharp blade had severed a vein, causing massive blood loss. The victim was identified as Sutish Noel Gabidas. Born on February 13, 1988. At just 31 years old, he was a brilliant Indian chemist working for an environmental science company in Singapore. Friends described Sish as a kind and sociable man. He was always eager to help his neighbors, often sharing homemade meals, and had never made an enemy. He deeply loved his wife and was a devoted father to his 2 children. A true family man in every sense. But after his murder, his 10-year-old son and 4-year-old daughter were left to face a future without their father. Soon after, some witnesses posted photos of the crime scene online, which quickly climbed to the top of search trends, sparking heated discussions. A group of thugs brazenly attacked someone in a shopping center. This is outrageous. They clearly have no regard for the police. Isn't Singapore supposed to be known for its safety? The public's anger was palpable, and many demanded that the police swiftly apprehend the culprits to quell the growing outrage. Singapore's Criminal Investigation Department, CD, teamed up with the Tangland Police Division to launch a joint investigation. A large contingent of officers descended on the scene, sealing off the main entrance to the building and interviewing witnesses. Because the victim had died from venous bleeding, unlike arterial bleeding, which causes blood to spurt, there was no dramatic spray, allowing him to stagger a short distance after being injured. This led many witnesses to initially mistake the incident for a mere brawl, paying little attention until he collapsed from excessive blood loss. Only then did the crowd realize something was terribly wrong. Some onlookers described the scene as utter chaos, with a large group of assailants attacking the victim before scattering in all directions after the assault. Among them, a young woman stood out. She appeared to be around 20 years old, dressed in a gray top, denim shorts, and black flip-flops with a slim waist, long legs, and a striking figure. She was undeniably beautiful. While her accomplices fled, she returned to the building to retrieve a flip-flop that had fallen off, leaving a lasting impression on many witnesses. The police quickly identified the young woman involved. She frequently posted selfies and makeup tutorials online, amassing a significant following, making her a well-known social media influencer, often dubbed the hot girl. At first glance, her sweet, innocent image seemed worlds apart from that of a cold-blooded killer. Could she have had a personal grudge against Sutish, or perhaps a romantic dispute that led her to enlist a group of thugs for revenge? However, this theory was swiftly dismissed by the police. Their investigation revealed that Sutish and Natalie Ciouan had never met and were complete strangers. How could there be any bad blood between them? According to Benjamin Tiffin Morris, Sadish's close friend, that evening, Sutish had been drinking with friends at a bar in Orchard Towers. During their gathering, they heard the sounds of a fight breaking out at the Naughty Girl nightclub on the second floor. Curious, Sutish went to check out the commotion, never imagining that this decision would be his last. Benjamin explained that Sutish was killed while observing the brawl. It seemed increasingly likely that this was a random attack, which would explain why the victim and the perpetrators had no prior connection. Witness accounts confirmed that around 6:20 a.m. on July 2, just 5 minutes before Sadish's death, a heated altercation had indeed erupted outside the Naughty Girl nightclub. Two groups totaling more than 10 people clashed in a chaotic scene. One man even brandished a karambit knife, slashing wildly. Someone who couldn't dodge in time took a deep cut to the face, leaving them disfigured on the spot. As the two groups fought fiercely, the club's security guards stepped in to de-escalate the situation. But the guards, lacking combat skills, were overpowered. One of them even had a finger severed by the thugs. Amid the chaos, a woman stood out for her aggression, flipping a table over and preparing to charge into the fray. Sensing the situation spiraling out of control, a loud shout suddenly rang out from the crowd. "The police are coming!" Panic ensued and the brawl came to an abrupt halt. Several of the troublemakers fled the scene immediately. Through surveillance footage, the police identified the woman who flipped the table as Natalie Ciouan. The man wielding the knife and the other individuals involved, however, remained unidentified for the time being. With no additional leads, the police decided to focus their investigation on Natalie. If they could piece together her movements on the night of the incident, tracking down the other suspects would become much easier. Using surveillance footage, nightclub registration records, and witness interviews, the police reconstructed part of the events leading up to the crime. Around 1 a.m. on July 1, Natalie had accepted an invitation from two friends, Ang Dayuan and Zoltan Yining, to go drinking at Club Mao. After a few rounds of drinks, the group moved to Club Peaches to continue their night of rivalry. By 5 a.m., they were still not ready to call it quits. Coincidentally, some of their other friends, Tanang, Lu Bungkong, Chan Ashing, and Tan Hung were also drinking nearby. The two groups ran into each other, and someone suggested they all join forces to keep the party going. At 5:25 a.m., the seven of them gathered and headed to the Naughty Girl nightclub in Orchard Towers, ready for what they called their third round of battle. While there, Tanang and Natalie started playing a card game. 10, not being particularly skilled, ended up drinking heavily as a penalty. Natalie teased him, saying, "Don't you know how to play?" It was meant as a light-hearted jab, but 10, already heavily intoxicated, flew into a rage. He pulled a carbide knife from his pocket, slammed it onto the table, and glared as if he were about to lash out. The others around them, alarmed, quickly intervened to calm him down, narrowly averting a confrontation. About an hour after this tense moment, the group finally ran out of steam and decided to head home. But as they stepped outside, they crossed paths with the rival group with whom they had a long-standing feud. With alcohol fueling their aggression, a fierce clash erupted, though it's unclear who threw the first punch. The brawl drew a crowd of onlookers, and Sitch was among them. Watching the chaos unfold, reviewing the surveillance footage from outside the nightclub, the police noted that two individuals sustained bleeding injuries during the fight, though neither was life-threatening. Afterward, Natalie and the six men took the elevator down to the first floor to leave. At the same moment, Sish, having observed the commotion, was descending on the escalator. That's when tragedy struck. After further verification, the police confirmed that it was Natalie's group of seven who had attacked Sish. Without hesitation, the authorities moved to arrest them. What's surprising is that within this group of young adults, most of whom were in their early 20s, several were already familiar faces in the prison system, hardened criminals with a history of unrepentant behavior. Out of the seven suspects, Tan Seung Yang, Ang Duan, and Tan Hong Hong all had prior criminal records. Among them, Tan Seung Yang stood out as the most notorious, the man wielding the gambit knife with a rap sheet that stretched back years. On November 2, 2015, Tan Seung was detained for assault at a driving school on Yubai Avenue. On August 23, 2016, he stabbed a man near Compton Lane. On February 23, 2017, he attacked a woman at the entrance to Sentosa Island. Just a month later, on March 22, he used a cleaver to injure two men in a shopping center. Then on July 1, 2019, the day before the murder, he assaulted a traffic police officer, kicking over the officer's motorcycle and causing damages amounting to $380 Singapore dollars. On the day of the murder, Tan Seung had just been released on bail. To put it bluntly, Tan Seung was an incurable, violent offender, someone who would lash out at anyone who crossed his path. Ang Duan and Tan Hong Hong were no saints either. Ang Guan had previously been arrested for public disorder and served time for causing grievous harm. Tan Hong Hong had a record for assault and illegal possession of weapons. Clearly, past attempts at rehabilitation had failed. For both of them. The remaining 4 suspects, while lacking prior convictions, were not entirely clean either. They had been linked to various unlawful activities. This time, however, they had crossed a line they couldn't come back from. After the attack, the 7 suspects fled the scene in a taxi. Tan Seung-yang headed to an area near a subway station and disappeared. Just as the police were planning his arrest, he unexpectedly turned himself in. Lu Bun Chong and Tan Hong Hong also surrendered after seeing the news. The remaining suspects were apprehended one by one. All 7 were charged with murder, a crime that could carry the death penalty under Singaporean law. Yet, the police still couldn't pinpoint the motive behind the attack. As the 7 suspects and Sish were complete strangers, it was only after interrogations that the police uncovered a shocking revelation. Sish may have been the one to provoke the confrontation. After the conflict at the nightclub subsided around 6:25 a.m., Tan Seong led the group out of the elevator, heading toward the exit of Orchard Towers. As they stepped outside, Sish descending on the escalator to the first floor happened to cross paths with Ang Devon, who was at the back of the group. Sish recognized one of the members from the group that had just clashed with Tan Ang's crew, a friend of his. Being the kind-hearted person he was, Satish wanted to stand up for his friend. He approached Ang Guan and confronted him, demanding, "What's your problem? What are you guys trying to do?" Ang Duan, taken aback, thought to himself, "Who are you to talk to me like that?" He shoved Satish aside, yelling, "Get lost." Satish, now enraged, pushed back hard, and the two began to fight. Tan Sin, who had just stepped outside, heard the commotion and turned back to assist. Seizing the opportunity, he stabbed Stish 3 times in the neck with his knife. Moments later, Natalie and Tan Seung-yang joined in, pummeling Sish in a brutal group assault. Within seconds, Sish was covered in blood. The group quickly fled the scene. Severely injured, Satish managed to stagger a few steps toward the entrance before collapsing to the ground. After the attack, Tan Seung-yang went to Lu Bunchung's apartment to clean up. Changing out of the blood-soaked white shirt he had worn during the assault, he discarded his shoes and the knife in a nearby dumpster. After the 7 suspects were arrested, the police searched the dumpster for evidence, but came up empty-handed. The white shirt had also been disposed of by Lu Bunch Chong. All 7 suspects were initially charged with murder. However, as the details of the case came to light, the murder charges against Lu Bunch Chong, Chan Jiang, and Tan Hung were dropped. They had not participated in the fight and had even tried to intervene to prevent the situation from escalating further. As a result, they were granted bail with the bail amounts ranging from 15,000 to 20,000 Singapore dollars. On August 29, 2019, the 3 were scheduled to return to court, but only Lu Bunch Chong and Chan Zame showed up. Tan Honging had fled, prompting the police to issue an immediate arrest warrant. Less than a month later, he was apprehended. Bafflingly, during his time on the run, he had attacked another man, a 30-year-old, adding to his list of offenses. The sentencing outcomes for the three were as follows. Lu Bunkong was convicted on 2 counts, obstructing justice and associating with an armed individual. Initially, he faced a minimum of 6 months in prison and a fine of $1,000 Singapore dollars. However, his lawyer argued that Lu, a 25-year-old with no history of violence, had merely witnessed a violent incident. The blood-stained shirt was disposed of under pressure from Tan Sanang, and Lu now fully recognized his mistake, pleading for leniency. The judge accepted the lawyer's plea, ultimately sentencing Lu to 5 months in prison and a fine of $1,000 Singapore dollars. Chan Jiaxing, due to his full cooperation with the police during the investigation and his attempts to de-escalate the situation, had his charges dropped by the prosecution. However, the prosecution noted that if he reoffended within the next 12 months, he would be brought back to court and this penalty would be enforced alongside any new charges. Tan Honghong, with his prior criminal record, compounded by his flight after being released on bail and his subsequent reoffense, was deemed to have acted with egregious behavior. He was sentenced to 4 years and 9 months in prison along with 12 strokes of the cane. Singapore's infamous caning punishment is known worldwide. 12 strokes are enough to leave lasting scars, if not worse. Many would say he got what he deserved. Among the remaining 4 suspects, the murder charges against Tan Shan, Ang Guan, Joel Tan Yuning, and Natalie Xiao Jun were eventually reduced. Tan Yang's murder charge was downgraded to assault because he had led the other group members to surrender. He was ultimately sentenced to just 4 weeks in prison. Du, with his prior criminal record combined with this assault charge, received a total sentence of 8 months in prison and 6 strokes of the cane. Now, let's delve deeper into Natalie Xiao Yuhin's case. As the only woman in the group of 7, coupled with her striking beauty and status as a social media influencer, she garnered significant attention from the outset. Her fans created a Natalie Xiao Jin supporters group on various online forums, sharing numerous glamorous photos of her. The posts quickly went viral, amassing over 220,000 supporters in a single day. Her advocates expressed sentiments like, "She's a good girl who was just dragged into this by her friends, and I hope the police give her a chance." Many rallied behind her, urging the authorities to release her swiftly. Of course, there were dissenting voices as well, with some commenting, "As a woman, she was even more aggressive than the men. She's no saint." The online discourse about her flooded social media, drawing even more attention to the case. During her trial, Natalie Xiao Yuhin stated, "I never thought Satish would actually die. I had been drinking, and when I saw my friend being attacked, I wanted to help. I know being drunk isn't an excuse. I'm truly sorry." Since the fatal wound was not inflicted by her, her murder charge was reduced to causing grievous harm, though she faced an additional charge of associating with an armed individual. With this outcome, Natalie Xiao Yuan was visibly elated in court. The reduced charge meant she had escaped the death penalty and had a chance at parole. After being granted parole and returning home, she shared her feelings of being given a second chance at life on Facebook, expressing her commitment to fully cooperate with the prosecution in future hearings. On October 9, 2020, Natalie Xiao Yuan returned to court for her sentencing and was given a 5-month prison term. As a woman, she was exempt from caning due to her good behavior, and the 107 days she had already spent in pre-trial detention. She ultimately served just over 3 months and was released on January 18, 2021. Her sentence sparked widespread dissatisfaction and confusion among the public. Many voiced their frustration. Is this what they call a prison sentence? It's just for show, like a slap on the wrist, far too lenient. She's so young and already this aggressive. Letting her off so easily will only make her disrespect the law. Even more, she might commit another crime in the future. Others speculated the judge probably went easy on her because she's a beautiful social media influencer. However, she also had a significant number of supporters. After her release, Natalie Xiaoan received an outpouring of encouragement and gifts from fans who comforted her with messages like, "It's all in the past now. Look forward to the future." The debate surrounding her lingered for a long time, with opinions sharply divided between praise and criticism. Ironically, the incident only amplified Natalie Xiaoyan's fame. Finally, let's turn our attention to the main perpetrator of this case, Tan Xiang. As the one who wielded the knife, his role in the murder was undeniable, and all eyes were on the court to see what fate awaited him. On October 3, 2023, Tan, then 32 years old, was officially brought to trial. Justice Eddie Abdullah of Singapore's High Court presided over the proceedings. During the trial, 47 witnesses, including the 6 co-defendants, were called to testify. The judge began by playing surveillance footage from the first and second floors of Orchard Towers. The prosecutor then stated that on July 2, 2019, Tan Xiang had used a knife to attack onlooker Muhammad Faris, Muhammad Ali, and security guard B. Bharth Krishnan during the brawl before using the same weapon to assault Sish. The evidence demonstrated that Tan Xiang had intentionally aimed to kill Satish. It was neither accidental nor reckless, constituting the crime of murder. Facing the prosecution's charges, Tan Xiang's defense lawyer pulled out all the stops, presenting various arguments to mitigate the crime. They claimed, for instance, another person's weapon caused Satish's death. In the surveillance footage, one of the group members was holding a black object and Satish had 8 wounds on his body. But the video only captured Tan Xiang striking 3 times. However, the judge dismissed these claims outright, stating that the black object was an e-cigarette and that the fatal wound on the victim was caused by a sharp blade consistent with the characteristics of the knife Tan Xiang carried. He had a karambit knife, a curved blade with a circular ring at the end of the handle, a weapon known for inflicting distinct wounds in a fight. The defense lawyer persisted, arguing that Tan Xiang was intoxicated at the time of the incident, impairing his judgment, and thus should not be convicted of murder. But the judge remained unmoved, responding calmly. Throughout the entire brawl, Tan Xiang had a clear target, specifically attacking Satish's face and neck. This isn't something that can be achieved by swinging a knife recklessly. It's evident he was sober and acted with clear intent. The surveillance footage shows unequivocally that Tan Xiang delivered the fatal blow. All attempts at defense fell apart. After more than 5 months of proceedings on April 25, 2024, Tan Xiang was sentenced to life imprisonment and 12 strokes of the cane. With the trial of the final suspect concluded, the case seemed to have reached its end. but for Satish's family and friends, the pain in their hearts remained an open wound, unlikely to ever fully heal. Nadia Mden, a former classmate of Satish and a well-known online personality, later posted a 12-minute video to honor his memory. Satish was such a cheerful person, playful at times, but always principled and incredibly kind-hearted. When I was pregnant and struggling to move around, he'd go out of his way to open the car door for me and look after my toddler son. For him to be taken away like this, leaving behind his wife and 2 young children, it's heartbreaking. I really want to help his family because he was truly a good person. Leveraging her online influence, Nadia raised a substantial sum through crowdfunding and donated it entirely to Satish's wife. Satish's best friend, Jisoo, also shared a post on Facebook. Satish was my drinking buddy, an amazing friend. We'd often drink, eat, and smoke together. It was our little joy. He was also quite forgetful, once leaving his favorite cap behind at a bar. Jess later retrieved the cap and personally delivered it to Satish's family, a touching gesture that spoke volumes about their friendship. However, the story doesn't end there. Satish's case stirred significant unrest in society due in part to Natalie Xiaoyuan's fame. The case drew increasing attention. Many felt the sentences were too lenient. Out of the 7 suspects, only 1 received a life sentence with no death penalty imposed. People expressed outrage on Satish's behalf, believing the perpetrators deserved harsher punishment. Over time, however, public sentiment began to shift. Singapore is a multi-ethnic, multicultural nation. And while its legal system emphasizes equality, societal and historical contexts sometimes lead to perceived inequities among different groups. In this trial, the varying severity of the sentences for the 7 suspects, particularly the fact that Chan Jiaxing had his charges dropped and was released, provided an opportunity for some to amplify the issue. Certain individuals seized the moment to highlight perceived judicial unfairness, claiming that ethnic minorities faced harsher sentences, while those of Chinese descent were treated more leniently. In October 2020, Sabas Nair, a Singaporean rapper and musician, publicly spoke out on social media, alleging that Chan Jiaxing's acquittal was a result of racial bias and Chinese privilege. His comments immediately sparked a wave of outrage. Some supported his view, arguing that Singapore's justice system was inherently unfair. Authorities quickly responded, stating that such rhetoric could undermine Singapore's racial harmony, deeply divide society, and severely disrespect the court's authority. They clarified that not all 7 suspects had participated in the assault. Chan Jiaxing and Lu Bunchong had even tried to stop the conflict, and the court's rulings were entirely based on the facts. On July 18, 2023, a local judge ruled that Subbubaz had intentionally incited racial tensions, releasing songs with overtly provocative and offensive content. He was sentenced to 6 weeks in prison. And so, the story comes to a close. While the perpetrators have received their due punishment for Satish's family, the pain of losing a loved one can never be fully mended. Reflecting on the entire case, we see Natalie Xiaoyuan as a young woman with a beautiful, innocent appearance, but a reckless and impulsive streak. She was easily swept up in late-night partying, entangled in complicated relationships, and lost her sense of direction in life. Natalie's actions in this case are undoubtedly blameworthy. However, her sentence has sparked significant debate about fairness and the deterrent effect of Singapore's legal system. Some argue she was shown excessive leniency while her co-defendants faced much harsher penalties, even the possibility of the death penalty. Natalie's story serves as a cautionary tale for young people, especially those with a social media following, about the importance of maintaining a healthy lifestyle, steering clear of vices, and avoiding toxic relationships. At the same time, the case raises broader questions about fairness in the legal system, how society treats young offenders, and the role that physical appearance might play in judicial outcomes. Story 3. Deep in Thailand's remote wilderness lies Halabala Forest, a place no one dares tread. Straddling the Timayan border, this dense, enigmatic jungle harbors the Bato tribe, a secretive, isolated community. Their name evokes chilling tales of horror rituals of human sacrifice, victims consumed for survival. Stories so ghastly few believe they're true. For centuries, the Bao lived hidden in Halabala's impenetrable depths. Legend claims they worshipped Paya, a mythic demon of unparalleled power. To earn its protection, they offered living souls to sate its bloodlust. Then they vanished. No trace, no clues. What happened to this cannibalistic tribe? Was their disappearance the result of a violent purge or something supernatural? Join us as we unravel the gruesome mystery of Halabala Forest, where the spirits of the lost still haunt those who venture too deep. In the border region of Yalanarathawat, Thailand near Malaysia, locals share a haunting tale. In the early 2000s, a 40-year-old herbalist from Slot often teeked through Halabala to gather rare plants. He knew the forest like the back of his hand. One day, he ventured into its heart known as the Devil's Mouth, a sacred forbidden zone. He disappeared for 3 days. Rangers found him naked, clothes and tatters, laughing manically in a clearing littered with human remains, bones, and skulls arranged in a circle. In his hand, a shriveled monkey's head. His lips muttered endlessly. Abbadia. It's still alive. It's still hungry. At the medical post, he couldn't speak coherently. His mind shattered, eyes wide with terror. Villagers whispered he'd been lured by the Bato's spectral murmurs, that those who entered their sacrificial grounds became prey forever. The site matched a legendary ritual altar where the Bao arranged human heads and spirals to summon Badia's spirit. Skeptics dismissed the villagers' tales. Yet even today, traces of the Bao linger at the Bao slope. A mass grave, brimming with their grisly remnants left behind after a horrific extermination. Along the banks of the Sunkalak River, a mere 50 meters from the nearest road, lies a cluster of uneven mounds. No concrete evidence exists yet. Locals revere this ground as sacred, untouchable. Legend holds that the Bato Slope is a hidden cave or bunker where the Bato tribe sought refuge before being attacked and burned alive. Even today, villagers offer incense, fearing the wrath of vengeful spirits. The Bato Slope stands as one of the few relics tied to the Bato legend known to many. With no official excavation by local authorities, belief in the Bao burial pit fuels a chilling tale that still sends shivers down spines. Beyond the mass grave, whispers speak of ancient stone pillars deep in Halabala Forest. Mysterious stakes stumbled upon by bored trekkers. Sud, and ash marked their bases. Are these the sacrificial pillars where the bow-bound victims piling wood to light the chosen? In their demonic rituals or crude tombstones marking bow graves? Perhaps boundary markers of their forbidden territory. The forest's treacherous terrain and unstable border security have left these bow pillars unverified, their truth shrouded in mystery. Tales of the Bato also describe a circle of skulls surrounding their encampment. Though no clear evidence remains, locals occasionally unearth skull fragments or teeth mixed with the soil near the burial site. They believe these are remnants of heads charred in the tribe's annihilation. In Hullaballas caves, explorers have found eerie carvings, crude sketches of human hunts, and long-tailed creatures. Locals claim these are the Bow's own writings or drawings chronicling their lives and beliefs. Intriguing yet unstudied, these markings remain unconfirmed. The strange relics scattered across the region keep the Bow enigma alive. Dig deeper into southern Thailand's folklore, and the Bato or Bado in local dialect emerge as a reclusive tribe hidden in the dense tropical Hullaballa forests straddling the Himalayan border. Dubbed the Amazon of Asia, Hullaballa is a pristine enigmatic wilderness teeming with rare flora and fauna. This untamed land nurtures tales of jungle people, cannibalistic tribes like the Bao vivid in local imagination. Beyond their gruesome acts, legends claim the Bato had tails. Thai Buddhists call them Yao Hung. Muslims. Bato means savage, wicked one in the local tongue. The name echoes the Bac people of the Malay Peninsula and Indonesia, known for tales of eating trespassers. Could the Bato be a descendant of these tribes? The connection remains a haunting mystery. The Bato legend isn't just about gruesome tales of cannibalism. It paints them as otherworldly, half-human, half-beast. Folklore describes their dark brown or crimson-skinned faces resembling macaque monkeys and curly hair. Most chilling, they had tails. Short stubs at the base of their spines, remnants of a vanished appendage. Hence their name Yao Hung, or long-tailed people in the local tongue. From their eerie appearance to their savage lifestyle, the Bato stood apart. They lived in isolation, hunting forest creatures to survive. Their brutal, bloodthirsty nature birthed a terrifying culture. Cannibalism wasn't just a ritual. It was a way of life passed down through generations. Like ancient tribes, the Bato had their own language for communication. They dwelled in caves, underground pits, or hidden nests. Deep in the jungle. Their society was simple, ruled by a single all-powerful leader. A structure not unlike other primitive tribes, but far more sinister. Locals whisper of their most horrifying ritual, ambushing travelers. The Bato set traps with sturdy vines, capsizing boats crossing their territory on the Sunkalak River. As victims sank, the tribe would swarm, seizing them alive for sacrificial rites. The river became a place of dread, especially at night. Locals steered clear, fearing they'd become the Bao's next prey. The Bao didn't just sacrifice. They relished turning victims into meals. Captives faced brutal deaths, their bodies partly consumed in rituals to appease their demon god, Badia. The rest cooked to feed the tribe. This savagery cemented the Bao as Hullaballa's most feared and haunting legend. Their cruelty and bizarre lifestyle left an indelible mark. After each sacrifice, victims' heads adorned ritual pillars around the ceremonial grounds. These weren't just symbols. They were psychological terror warning intruders to stay away. Trekkers and Halabala still speak of these stone pillars, grim relics of a barbaric culture. The Bato's cruelty extended within. Elders too weak to work faced a merciless fate. Sacrificial slaughter. Deemed useless, they were sent to the spirits their bodies used to sustain the strong. A ruthless survival philosophy. Eliminate the weak to preserve the tribe. The Halabala forest legend isn't just about the Bao's savage cannibalism. It's steeped in the terror of Batia, a demon god. Local folklore paints Paya not as a mere monster, but as an ancient deity that devours innocent souls craving fresh blood. Baya looms in Halabala's shadow depths, a colossal beast resembling an ape, yet far more sinister. Long limbs, razor-sharp claws. Teeth like a shark's, layered and jagged, built to tear and destroy. Its most striking feature, a powerful elongated tail, a symbol tying it to the Bato. Glowing red eyes hunt prey in the darkness, chilling anyone who dares. Imagine it. Some tales liken Batia's face to the grotesque carvings of Kala, the Hindu god of time, with a gaping M that engulfs all. Its mouth isn't just for feeding. It's a force of annihilation, swallowing anything that trespasses its realm. One glance at its face brings the crushing weight of imminent death. Batia isn't just a mythic demon. It's the forest's wrath incarnate, raging against human intruders. Legend tells of the Bato awakening Baya long ago, venturing into Halabala's sacred core, a forbidden zone. Instead of destruction, they struck a pact. The Bato would offer living sacrifices, spilling blood to appease Batia in exchange for its protection. Thus, Batia became their demon ancestor, a supernatural force they both feared and revered. In Bata life, Batia was no mere deity. It was supreme, guiding every major decision. Their every move followed the will of the demon, a belief passed down generations before pivotal events. Relocating camps or starting hunts. The tribe shaman held rituals to summon Batia, reading omens in the wind. Animal cries, or the forest pulse to gauge its approval. If an outsider strayed into their jungle, the Bato sprang into action, preparing a human offering for their demon. To them, sacrifice wasn't just duty. It was a sacred act fortifying the tribe's spirit. Baya wasn't just a god to worship. It was an unseen force commanding their every move. Baya's power wasn't vague fear. It was a ruthless guide whispering into Bao minds, fueling their bloodlust and primal instincts. They believed their violence was divine will. Were they merely pawns of a demon's command? Legend claims Batia granted the Bao unearthly power, swift movement through the jungle, superhuman strength, and beast-like cunning. But the cost was horrific. They had to feed Batia human lives, stop the sacrifices, and Batia's wrath would turn on them, slaughtering the very tribe that worshipped it for centuries. Locals say the Bao held demon-feeding rituals yearly or each hunting season. Captured victims still alive were offered to Batia. The tribe believed the demon devoured their souls, feasting on their terror while the body sustained the Bato. This bizarre symbiosis with Batia kept the tribe alive, their survival tied to the demon's blessing. To summon Batia, the Bato performed mystic rites deep in the forest. On moonless nights, their shaman painted blood runes on stones, erected sacrificial pillars, and chanted ancient incantations. One phrase echoed Badia Hawaru, Badia Hararu. A call to the demon in the Bato's ancient tongue. As the chant rose, Badia emerged from the jungle's darkness, ready to claim its offering. The Bao offered beating hearts and severed heads, precious gifts to sate Badia's hunger. In return, the demon cloaked them from human eyes and instilled fear, keeping intruders at bay. This blood pact bound the Bao to Badia across generations, a brutal cycle of sacrifice to ensure their survival. Yet, these tales passed down in Thai folklore lack scientific proof linking the Bao to their demon god. But a story of gods, monsters, and humans serving a demon's hunger couldn't last forever. According to Halabala's locals, the Bao's savagery led to their downfall. Villagers, tormented by the Bato's terror for years, finally acted to end the nightmare. Over a century ago, in the 1910s or 1920s, a massacre ended the dark era when the jungle swallowed men whole. After years of mysterious disappearances, villagers in Wang and Lahit suspected more than wild beasts. During land clearing, they uncovered the Bao's lair. Horrified and enraged, they vowed to eradicate these human-clad monsters. A villager fluent in the Bato tongue posed as an envoy, luring the tribe with a lie. Westerners wanted to buy krang resin, a valuable forest sap. Eager for trade, the Bato gathered the resin, dreaming of riches. The villagers crafted a cunning plan. They invited the Bao to a celebratory feast before the deal. The meal, laced with poisonous yam mixed with mung beans, was irresistible. As the Bata gorged, they fell into a stupor. Seizing the moment, the villagers doused the lair with resin and set it ablaze. Flames roared, engulfing the tribe. The cave collapsed, burying the Bato under rock and earth. Locals believe the entire tribe perished that fateful night. After the inferno, Halabala's forest grew quiet and tales of the cannibal shadow faded. The Bato legend, though its timeline is murky, endures as a grim warning, a tale of a dark era when the jungle devoured men. Over a century later, the Bato's traces have nearly vanished, yet their story lingers woven into the chilling myths of Halabala Forest. Though the Bao are gone, their terrifying legacy haunts southern Thailand's psyche. Fear grips villages along Halabala's edge, where Bao is a boogeyman used to scare children. In Wing and Lahit, Narathiwat province, the Bao embody sheer terror. Locals believe tailed ones still lurk in the forest, ready to pounce on anyone who strays too far. When someone vanishes in the jungle, whispers spread the Bao took them. Mysterious disappearances, animal attacks, even armed conflicts in the region are blamed on the curse of the demon forest, Bata and Badia. At night, some swear they see shadowy figures at the forest's edge or hear whispers calling their names in the wind, ghosts of the Bao hunting for prey. These tales, though unproven, keep the Bao legend alive, etched into local minds. Folklore claims Badia's curse still clings to this untamed jungle. They say eerie whispers in the night, flickering shadows, their Badia's lure, drawing the lost deeper. Some who wander Halabala return crazed, starved, and broken, raving about long-tailed demon shadows chasing them. Others vanish without a trace. A famous tale speaks of a survivor driven mad, muttering about tailed demons. Villagers believe he saw Badia, and those who glimpse the demon pay with their lives or souls. These stories shield Halabala, keeping intruders at bay who would dare venture into its haunted depths. In sum, Hullabaloo's fame isn't just its pristine beauty. It's the sinister veil draped over it. The legend of the savage bow and their demon Batia transforms this forest into a spiritual abyss where the line between man and monster blurs. True or not, this fear keeps Hullaballa untouched. Story 4. On a grim afternoon in Funwan District, Taichung City, police forced their way into a house and froze. At the harrowing sight, 5 members of a family lay motionless beside a cold, blackened charcoal brazier as if a somber ritual had reached its grim conclusion. Scattered around the scene were several suicide notes, their haunting words etched in despair. "There's no way out. Let's all go together." Why would a seemingly warm, tight-knit family choose to end their lives as one? The answer slowly unraveled through a golden bean investment scheme, promising dazzling profits, but concealing a chilling trap that swayed the seeds for this shock. Now, let's unravel the story of this devastating case. Funyuan, a historic district teeming with life in central Taiwan, is known for its peaceful charm, vibrant traditional markets, and tight-knit community. Yet in early July 2025, this very place was shaken to its core by horrific news. A family of 5 found dead in their rented home, sending shockwaves not just through Funwan, but across Taiwan. Initial reports vaguely described a 5-person murder case tied to a charcoal brazier, leaving the public reeling with questions. Was this a collective suicide or a tragic carbon monoxide accident? All 5 victims, middle-aged parents, and their 3 adult children showed no signs of external injuries or struggle. If they willingly descended into the abyss, what desperate motive drove an entire family to such an end? Or if this was a crime, who was the perpetrator? And how did they orchestrate the quiet demise of 5 souls? The suicide notes hinting at a crushing debt and apologies for trusting the wrong person only deepen the mystery. The story begins on July 2, 2025 when an urgent call lit up the Funwan police station. The caller, a co-worker of Wang IQ name, changed a mechanic at a local factory, reported that Wang had been absent from work for 2 days. Without explanation, his phone eerily silent. Sensing something was wrong, the co-worker alerted the authorities. Local police quickly contacted Hung Guinlong with the neighborhood chief where the Wang family lived. At 5:48 p.m. that day, a team of officers, the chief, and a locksmith stood before the family's rented home, which doubled as their small shop. The door was locked tight, and no one answered their calls. With the locksmith's help, the iron door creaked open, revealing a scene that left everyone present in stunned silence. Inside, 5 bodies lay neatly side by side, motionless. The air was thick with the acrid stench of half-burned charcoal. Near the bodies, a spent brazier lay discarded, a telltale sign of carbon monoxide poisoning often used in suicides. At first glance, there were no wounds, no signs of a struggle, and the room was undisturbed. In the dim light, police spotted a stack of handwritten letters on the table pointing to a likely mass suicide. But why would 5 people, parents, and their 3 grown children, choose to descend into darkness together? The question sent chills through the scenes. "Commander, I've been in this job for years, but I've never seen an entire family perish so tragically like this." The victims' identities were swiftly confirmed through documents at the scene. Names changed. They were Wang GX, 62, the Family patriarch, his wife Dove, 63, and their 3 children, eldest daughter Wang Le, 35, second daughter Wang Libi, 34, and youngest son Wang Iq, 28. The devastating news was relayed to superiors and forensic and criminal investigation units rushed to the scene. The site inside the small home, which doubled as a military surplus shop, haunted seasoned investigators. 5 bodies lay side by side on the bedroom floor, arranged so neatly. It seemed they had calmly awaited their final moments. No signs of resistance or external force were found. All doors were locked from the inside. The charcoal brazier, often used for carbon monoxide poisoning, had burned out, its ashes scattered. The air conditioner and fan were off, and door gaps were sealed with wet cloths, showing meticulous preparation to trap lethal co-gas. On the table for suicide, notes were neatly stacked beside a dead phone. Each note penned by Lee Ali B and IQ echoed the same crushing despair they spoke of. Insurmountable debts, a dead end driven by financial ruin, and most heart-wrenching the words, "We have no choice but to leave this world together." Notably, the daughter's notes expressed regret for trusting a friend named Jean and falling for a fake investment. These were critical clues. Mr. Wang left no note. Initial forensics confirmed all 5 died from high levels of co-poisoning, consistent with the sealed room charcoal setup. Estimated time of death was over 24 hours earlier, likely the night of July 1 or early morning of July 6, 2025. No traces of poison or injuries were found, ruling out assassination initially. Neighbors described the Wang family as reserved, keeping to themselves. Wang's wife was known as calm and diligent, running a shop selling police uniforms and accessories from their home. Wang's ex helped his wife while working at a pork stall in the market to make ends meet. Their children were Li, 35, single, selling goods online from home, Li B, 34, a career soldier, and IQ, 28, a factory mechanic. Acquaintances insisted the family had no internal conflicts and wasn't destitute, making their collective suicide baffling. The investigation shifted to decoding the cryptic clues left behind the dead, the gold investment, and the friend named Jean. That night, July 2, authorities sealed the scene and seized the victims' phones and computers for data analysis. A snag emerged. 4 of the 5 phones were dead, requiring time to charge and bypass security. Yet, the suicide notes offered a vital lead detailing a gold investment scam that led to a debt of 5 million TWWD. The notes pointed to Jean, Lee's school friend, as the one who lured them into the trap. Investigators zeroed in on this lead. Lei had a close friend, Jean, 35, from her high school days, with whom she stayed in touch. Recently, Lee had mentioned to relatives earning thousands of TWWD through gold investments via Jean. Cross-referencing the notes, Jean became the prime suspect. By the morning of July 3, police summoned friends and relatives for statements. A friend of Mrs. D provided a chilling revelation around June 25. D had texted her pleading for help, saying the family was swindled in a golden bean investment scam, losing everything and facing threats. In her final message, D choked out, "If this is it, our family, we're done." This matched the note's despairing tone. No way out. It's all over. Clearly, the family was in utter desperation, ensnared by deceit and intimidation. Another clue came from a local counselor's office days before the tragedy on June 21. Mr. and Mrs. Wang had sought help from City Councilor Yi Juan. Wang texted she, "Our family was scammed. All our money's gone and they're demanding more. While threatening to smash our shop, I need a meeting for legal advice." She responded promptly, inviting them to his office and offering help. But minutes later, Wang texted back, "It was a misunderstanding. It's sorted now. No worries. Thank you." This abrupt shift from panic to claiming it sorted stunned She. He had urged the Wangs to report the scam to police, warning of ballooning debts from predatory loans. But the family, likely terrified by threats, avoided legal recourse. From these findings, investigators were certain the Wang's death stemmed from a ruthless scam. The next target tracked down Jiang from the friend named in the notes and others who drove the family to ruin. Police visited Zhenang's beauty salon in Fengyiyan based on gathered intel. The small shop was shuttered when they arrived on July 3 afternoon and Jiang was unreachable by phone. The landlord reported Jiang had closed shop on July 1, her phone off, and even her family couldn't contact her. This sudden disappearance fueled suspicions of her involvement and possible flight. A quick search of the salon yielded no significant documents, but uncovered receipts showing Chang's frequent gold transactions. Meanwhile, neighbors and local creditors painted a clearer picture of the family's final days. Neighbors recounted a chilling scene on the afternoon of June 30. A group of 3 or 4 strangers stormed into the Wang's shop, loudly demanding payment. Calling themselves the Li creditors, they claimed the family owed 2 million to Li for breaching a contract. A heated argument erupted before they moved inside to negotiate behind closed doors. When the group left, the Wangs' faces were ashen, drained of hope. By the evening of July 1, a pawn shop worker arrived, seizing 2 motorcycles and a car, citing unpaid debts. The picture was grim, and the Wang's home was mortgaged, their vehicles gone, and their lives under constant threat. Police believe the family's fatal decision was made after that fateful July 1, when their last assets vanished. Alongside witness accounts, the tech team recovered data from the victims' phones, peeling back the layers of the scam that ensnared them. On Li's phone, investigators found a line chat group named Gold Bean Group with dozens of members. Digging through its history, they learned that in early June 2025, Li was invited to the group by Gene username Jenny Jiang. The group buzzed with talk of a golden bean investment scheme, buying small gold bars dubbed golden beans for quick profits. Admins frequently posted receipts flaunting thousands of TB, duty, and gains, painting the project as legitimate and lucrative. A user named Lilial, claiming to be the project manager, posted enticing offers. Invest $150,000 in gold, get a $3,000 commission, instantly a 2% return per transaction. Lured by Zhang's persuasion, Li was hooked by the promise of easy money. Messages showed she joined early rounds, swiping her credit card for $150,000 TWWD 4.15 in gold and receiving the promised $3,000 TWWD 92 commission. The scheme seemed too good to be true, solely roped in her mother and sister, the entire family, 5 and all, scrambled funds, draining savings, and maxing out credit cards to buy gold as instructed. By mid-June they'd sunk to 3 million TWWD 61,5338 to $92.38 into the scheme. Early transactions paid small commissions, reinforcing their trust in the gold project. It was a classic scam tactic to dangle small profits to build confidence, then reel victims in for bigger losses. But around June 20th, the scam turned sinister. Lil announced in the group that the company's accounts were frozen for investigation, halting commission payments. Panic swept the members, especially the Wangs, who'd bet nearly all their savings. Jiang stepped in, calming Li and claiming she knew a investor behind a gold project who could secure a refund. Desperate, Mrs. Du and Lei agreed to meet this Ms. Li. At the meeting, Li, posing as a company rep, accused the Wangs of breaching the investment contract by halting contributions mid-cycle. She demanded $2 million TWWD 61,538 in compensation, threatening legal action. Terrified and cornered, the Wangs begged for leniency. Li offered to deal a $2 million TWWD loan to settle the debt secured by their apartment. Desperate to recover, Mr. and Mrs. Wang signed mortgaging their home for a high-interest loan from a Zhonghua loan shark ring. They handed the money to Li. Days later, the scammers flipped. They called Mrs. Du claiming additional fees of $3 million, do not detwa $5 million. Du would add $153 to $846 USD. The exact debt mentioned in the suicide notes. Reeling from the first blow, the family now faced a crushing new debt on paper. Interest rates skyrocketed with daily penalties piling up. From late June, the Wangs endured relentless psychological torment. Relatives said they received dozens of daily calls from unknown numbers demanding payment with threats to ruin their business if they didn't comply. Jean the friend hounded Li, insisting she pressure her parents to pay. Li vowed to sell personal assets to clear the debt, but compounding interest outpaced her efforts. Li, likely blaming herself for the catastrophe, sank into deep depression. As July loomed, the family situation grew dire. Debt collectors showed up at their door, threatening violence. The roles of Li and Jiang, creditor and friend, left the Wangs paralyzed, unsure who to trust. Too scared to alert police and unable to afford a lawyer, they were trapped. Yet in their final moments, Mrs. Duke clung to a flicker of hope. She asked a friend to contact a journalist to expose the scam. But before that could happen, the debt collector's visit on June 30th and the pawn shop seizure on July 1st crushed them. Losing their vehicles and facing threats that proved all too real, the family collapsed under the weight. They chose to end their suffering together, believing in their tragic logic that leaving anyone behind would only mean more pain. The suicide note's words, "No way out, we all go together," captured their despair. On the night of July 1st, 2025, with doors sealed tight, the family of 5 gathered in their small bedroom. They likely held each other, tears falling for the last time. Mr. Wang quietly lit the charcoal brazier. As the flames took hold, odorless CO gas filled the room. Mrs. D closed her eyes, whispering Buddhist prayers. 5 lives, cornered by betrayal, lay down on a prepared mat. The coup worked swiftly, lulling them into unconsciousness. Perhaps in their final moments, the glittering promise of golden beans flashed before them, only to fade into the thick charcoal smoke. By midnight, the last heartbeat in the room fell silent. The family of 5 ended their lives in quiet, heartbreaking tragedy, leaving behind a searing question of trust and crime. With the cause of death clear, investigators shifted their focus to dismantling the scam ring. On July 4, 2025, armed with mounting evidence, Tai Chong police issued urgent summons for 2 suspects, Jean Lee's friend and a woman surnamed Lee around 40, who posed as the gold project manager and directly extorted the Wong family. Both were absent from their residences, forcing police to deploy advanced tactics, tracing their phone signals and recent contacts. By noon on July 4, detectives pinpointed Zhang's phone at a small hotel in Sichuan district. A task force swooped in, arresting her without resistance. At the station, Chang's mother and boyfriend arrived frantic, pleading her innocence. She only introduced friends to each other. She wasn't involved in any investments, but the evidence was damning. Line chat logs showed Zhang actively luring Leah into the scheme. Private messages revealed she earned commissions for recruiting new investors. Zhang was detained for questioning. Meanwhile, Lee, the mastermind behind the Golden Bean scam, who handled the deal closing, had a prior conviction for financial fraud and was already on the investigation bureau's radar. Chang's testimony and collected evidence confirmed Lee as the ringleader. That evening, police tracked Lee to a friend's house in Zhonghua, with a search and arrest warrant approved by the prosecutor's office. Officers stormed in at 9 p.m. on July 4, apprehending Lee. She remained composed, but evasive. Both Jean and Lee denied responsibility for the Wang's deaths, distancing themselves from the tragedy. Jean claimed she only introduced friends to business, unaware it was a scam. Lee insisted they willingly borrowed money to invest. I just followed the contract. Their deflections crumbled against the weight of evidence. By dawn on July 5, the Central Investigation Bureau and police expanded searches, seizing computers and ledgers from Lee's network. Evidence suggested the ring had swindled dozens more victims with similar tactics. On the morning of July 5, the Taichung prosecutor's office charged Zhang with fraudulent appropriation of property and issued a travel ban pending further investigation. We remained in custody for deeper interrogation. At a noon press conference, Wang Kaixiu, deputy chief of Fang and Guoyan police, declared, "We view this as a grave fraud case leading to loss of life. All involved, from masterminds to intermediaries, will face rigorous investigation and punishment." Excerpts from the family's 4 suicide notes were revealed with one line piercing hearts. "We regret trusting Jean. Regret chasing fake investments. Drowned in debt we can't repay. We choose to leave." These words directly name Jean, the trusted friend, as a key culprit in the tragedy. The killers in this case wielded no weapons, only deception cloaked as investment opportunity. Investigations pinpointed Zhang and Lee as the primary culprits facing criminal charges. Zhang, Leah's old school friend, ran a beauty salon. Outwardly friendly and persuasive, she exploited Leah's trust. Jean joined the Golden Bean scam ring a year earlier as a broker, using personal connections to recruit investors for commissions. In the Wang's Case, she leveraged her long friendship with Leah. While Jean may not have directly handled money or issued threats, she was the bridge that led the family into the trap. The victim's notes lamenting their trust in Jiang underscored her pivotal role. Lee, the mastermind, went by Lily in the scam group. Around 41, with a prior fraud conviction and prison time, she orchestrated the Golden Bean scheme, setting up chat groups, dangling initial commissions, then freezing accounts and demanding penalties. Posing as a gold investment firm manager, she met the Wangs using fake contracts and breach penalties to extort more money. Leah hired loan sharks and mob enforcers to squeeze every last cent from victims, pushing them to ruin. With ties to central Taiwan's underworld, Leah was cunning, vanishing after the Wangs' deaths to avoid scrutiny. But the suicide notes exposed her role with stark clarity. Their motive was pure greed. To them, victims were mere prey to exploit, consequences be damned. No evidence suggested Jiang or Leah had personal ties or grudges with the Wangs. They targeted them for their vulnerability and assets. Their mindset was chillingly ruthless. When the scam unraveled, they focused on evading justice, showing no remorse for the 5 deaths. This callousness fueled public outrage, demanding harsh punishment. They likely saw lives as expendable, prioritizing escape and profit. But they miscalculated. The Wang's suicide notes became a searing indictment, exposing their crimes. Within days, police tracked down the mastermind and her accomplice. Regret came too late. Now these predators face justice, paying the price for their greed that stole an entire family's lives. In Taiwan, fraud with severe consequences carries heavy penalties. On July 6, 2025, the Taichung prosecutor's office charged Jiang and Li with organized fraudulent appropriation of property. Aggravating factors, threats, and the catastrophic outcome of 5 deaths were under review. While Taiwan's laws lack a specific indirect homicide charge for fraud, prosecutors vowed to pursue the harshest possible sentences. Jiang was released on bail but barred from leaving the area while he remained in custody to prevent evidence tampering. At the preliminary trial slated for late 2025, prosecutors will lay bare the Golden Bean scam's sinister plot, asserting that Jiang and Li directly caused the family's tragic end. Xianang's defense may argue she acted unintentionally, claiming she too lost money in the scheme to distance herself from complicity. But with damning chat logs showing her commission earnings and the victim's suicide notes explicitly condemning her, this defense seems shaky. Li, with her prior fraud conviction and thuggish intimidation tactics, has little room to dodge guilt. The Phone Guy family's tragedy sent shockwaves through Taiwan. Major networks aired specials with experts dissecting the criminals' psychological manipulation and condemning their ruthless tactics. Online forums buzzed with grief for the ill-fated family and fury, demanding public trials and severe punishment for the scammers. The case sparked deep societal questions. First, how could an educated, honest family like the Wangs fall so painfully into a trap? The answer lies in the scammers' cunning exploitation of human greed and trust. The Wangs were ensnared by faith in a friend and the lure of quick profits. The lesson is stark. No investment promising high returns with zero risk is ever legitimate. Second, support for financial scam victims needs urgent attention. The Wangs sought help but retreated in fear. Had they reported the scam early, their losses might have been mitigated. Taiwan's police have dedicated anti-fraud units urging citizens to use legal channels such as court-ordered debt relief to counter predatory loans. Tragically, shame and fear silenced the Wangs. Councillor Jian, devastated by the news, said, "If they'd returned to my office, we could have connected them with police and legal aid, but they never came back. This is a wake-up call. Scam victims must seek help without hesitation. To prevent such tragedies, experts urge authorities to boost awareness of legal protections, guide victims through processes, and involve civic groups to negotiate with creditors. Above all, victims must know life outweighs money lost. Funds can be regained, but not lost lives." Third, the case sounds an alarm about the erosion of trust and friendship in modern society. It's heart-wrenching that a friend led the family to ruin. While not all betray like Jean, this shows even close relationships can be exploited for profit. The public must stay vigilant. Scams don't always come from strangers. Sometimes they hide behind familiar faces. Always verify financial offers independently, never trusting blindly, out of loyalty or courtesy. The case closed with the tragic loss of 5 innocent lives, but its ripples endure in Taiwan. From now on, tales of too good to be true investments will evoke this tragedy. Urgent caution. The Wangs' deaths, though senseless, may spur society and lawmakers to crack down harder on fraud, ensuring no other family suffers the same fate. Story 5. On one warm November evening, the silence of the peaceful town of Aramona shattered. What started as a seemingly minor neighborhood dispute suddenly spiraled into a night of pure terror. By the time it ended, the tight-knit community was left in ruins, its homes burned down, its streets soaked in blood, and its people haunted by what they witnessed. No one could have imagined that such horror would unfold in their backyard, or that the man behind it had been living among them all along. But it's known that he believed he had caught the Tanu-flu from the Holdens and was upset about this. Gary Holden's bullet-ridden body was found near his burnt-out house. His 11-year-old daughter and the daughter of his partner were staying with him at the time. The 2 young girls are still missing, but police now believe they may have perished in the house fire. The fire burned out of control for hours. Because the fire brigade was turned back when the police heard the shots. 9 bodies were found close to Holden's house. It's likely the raging fire attracted them into Gray's deadly trap. Detective Sergeant Paul Knox, along with murdered policeman Stu Guthrie, was one of the first on the scene. Knox says Guthrie was observing the gunman and reporting his position over the radio, but then Guthrie lost sight of the gunman. He was in the process of telling us about his lack of vision so far as the offender was concerned. And then he continued with a warning to someone who was approaching him to stop or he would shoot. At that stage, I left the radio. I knew something was going to happen. I was running to where another colleague was positioned and I heard the volley of shots. Was that person approaching him the offender? Well, it could only have been. What sort of weapon did he have? Guthrie. Sergeant Guthrie had a .38 pistol. Do you think he was caught by surprise? It began with something so ordinary, just a small argument between neighbors. On the evening of November 13th, around 7:30 p.m., a man stood outside his home in the quiet seaside town of Aramona, confronting Gary Holden. The reason? One of Holden's young daughters had wandered onto his property. It should have ended with a sigh, maybe a few harsh words, but instead it became the spark that lit a deadly fire. Moments after the confrontation, the man turned and walked calmly back into his house. Inside, he picked up a Nuringo 84 semi-automatic rifle, stepped back out into the night and opened fire. Bullets tore through Holden's chest in a matter of seconds. And as he collapsed, the shooter walked over and fired once more, this time into his head. The shot was cold, deliberate. And it was only the beginning. Nearby, 3 young girls had seen it all unfold. Holden's daughters, Chakita and Jasmine, along with Reva. His girlfriend's child screamed and bolted toward the house, scrambling to hide. But the killer was already on the move. He followed them into the home like a predator tracking its prey. He found Shakita first. The .22 caliber rifle he now carried barked out rounds. One hit her chest, another her arm, and a third lodged deep in her abdomen. Yet somehow, despite the pain, despite the horror, she ran out the back door, past her father's lifeless body, and straight toward the only place she thought might still be safe, Julie Bryson's house. Back at Holden's property, the man kept hunting. He soon found the 2 remaining girls, Jasmine and Reva, and killed them with the same chilling ease. Then, as if that weren't enough, he set the house ablaze. Flames roared through the structure, consuming everything inside, hiding his crimes behind a wall of smoke and fire. Julie and Bryson, realizing what was happening, realizing that her daughter and Holden's child were still inside that burning home, acted on instinct. She jumped into her van with the injured Chakita and raced toward the inferno. But as she neared, bullets began raining down on the vehicle. The shooter was still there, and he wasn't done yet. Chaos spread through Aram Moana like wildfire. With the Holden house now engulfed in flames and the sound of gunshots echoing across the darkening sky, neighbors began to panic. A group of locals in a utility vehicle pulled up, drawn by the fire, hoping to help. But what they didn't know was that a killer was already lurking in the shadows. And now he wasn't just targeting one house. He was hunting anyone who crossed his path. Without warning, the man opened fire on the vehicle. Screams tore through the quiet streets as people scattered. Vanessa Percy tried to run, her footsteps pounding the pavement in a desperate rhythm, but it was too late. Several bullets struck her in the back and she collapsed to the ground. Despite frantic efforts to save her, she died at the scene just hours later. Then he turned to the children. Leo Wilson, Dion Percy, and their sister Stacy were caught in the line of fire. The 2 boys didn't stand a chance. The bullets struck them down where they stood. Their small lives ended in an instant. Stacy was hit in the abdomen, gravely injured, but clinging to life. Their father, Ross Percy, who had been driving them home after a peaceful day of fishing, was next. 1 bullet to the head ended his life instantly. What was meant to be a quiet evening with family had turned into an unthinkable nightmare. But the bloodshed didn't stop there. Before we continue talking about the horrors this man committed, let's go back in time to see who he really was. David Malcolm Gray, born on November 20, 1956 in Dunedin, New Zealand, was 33 years old at the time of the Aramalana massacre. He had lived a quiet and largely unnoticed life in the small coastal town before becoming the central figure in one of the darkest chapters of New Zealand's history. Gray attended Port Chalmers Primary School and later Otago Boy High School. There was nothing remarkable about him during his school years. He was an average student, remembered by classmates as quiet and unassuming. But that quietness, many would later reflect, bordered on isolation. He was described by people who had known him since childhood as a loner, someone who never quite fit in. He drifted through life after school, occasionally picking up work as a farmhand, but had been unemployed for several years by 1990. The loss of his parents marked a turning point. His father passed away, and when his mother died in 1985, it hit Gray particularly hard. According to his sister, the death of their mother devastated him, and soon after he left Port Chalmers and moved permanently into the family's small holiday home in Aramo, a modest, isolated community surrounded by sea and bush. Gray kept to himself. He became a familiar face at Galaxy Books and Records in Lower Stewart Street, Dunedin, where he was known for his deep interest in military history and warfare. The shop's owner, Bill Brazen, said Gray had been a customer for 7 years and often bought Soldier of Fortune magazine and military-themed books. However, in early 1990s, things took a disturbing turn. Gray threatened a store assistant with what appeared to be a shotgun concealed in a cardboard box. That incident led to Brazen issuing a trespass notice against him the following month. Though Gray's sister recalled his love for animals, locals in Aramo said his passion often turned into conflict, particularly with his neighbor, Gary Holden. Holden's pets frequently died under suspicious circumstances, which fueled tension between the two men. That tension would ultimately ignite the horrific chain of events that unfolded in November. But in the years leading up to it, Gray was simply seen as a reclusive, troubled man, someone who lurked at the edge of the community. Rarely noticed and even more rarely understood. And now back to the horrific massacre. Gray kept moving, slipping from house to house like a ghost with a loaded weapon. He entered the home of Tim Jameson and executed him, then turned his gun on Vic Crimp, an elderly local and former mayor of Green Island. Both were killed without a shred of mercy, and still the rampage continued. James Dixon had simply stepped outside to look for his missing dog. Gray shot him dead without hesitation. The gunfire startled James' mother, Eva Helen Dixon, and their neighbor, Chris Cole, who rushed into the street to understand what was happening. As Cole picked up the phone inside a booth to call the police, Gray opened fire again. Cole was wounded. Eva, still recovering from a hip replacement and barely able to walk, dropped to the ground and dragged herself into a ditch to avoid being shot. With sheer willpower, she crawled her way into her home and dialed 111. The emergency number, telling the dispatcher exactly what was happening. But she didn't stop there. This brave, injured woman crawled back through the darkness to the wounded Chris Cole and whispered to him, "Help is coming." It was a promise she meant with all her heart. Help did come, but too late. Chris Cole died in the hospital. That night, Aramona, a place where children played barefoot in the sand and neighbors shared cups of tea, was turned into a war zone, and the man behind it all was still on the loose. The quiet coastal air of Aramona was now thick with smoke, screams, and sirens. As darkness crept in, and the last rays of sunlight melted behind the horizon, a storm was gathering, not in the sky, but on the ground. First responders were racing into a nightmare, unaware of the full scope of the carnage waiting for them. Among them was Sergeant Stewart Guthrie, a seasoned officer and local hero who wasn't just a cop that night. He became the front line. Armed only with a standard issue Smith & Wesson Model 10 revolver, Guthrie arrived with a calm intensity that betrayed none of the chaos unfolding around him. In New Zealand, police don't carry firearms by default, but this wasn't a night for normal rules. Guthrie quickly scanned the wreckage and called on Constable Russell Anderson, who had arrived with the fire service just moments earlier. In a bold move, Guthrie handed Anderson a civilian's rifle, anything to even the odds against the man wreaking havoc with military-style weaponry. The night deepened as they crept through the ravaged township, the flickering light of burning homes casting long, ominous shadows across blood-stained streets. When they reached the property where the killer was believed to be hiding, Guthrie made the first tactical call. He positioned Anderson to guard the front, knowing full well the real danger lay behind. With steady breaths and nerves of steel, he moved to the rear of the house alone, stepping straight into the lion's den. Detective Paul Allen Knox and 2 additional constables arrived to begin forming a containment perimeter, a textbook move under the cord and contain appeal strategy used for armed offenders. But this situation was anything but textbook. Inside the house, the killer moved like a phantom, and Guthrie, hidden in the cover of the dunes, tracked him. He whispered real-time updates to the communication center, guiding the operation, anchoring the thin blue line between order and total anarchy. For a moment, he could see gray, then he couldn't. Silence fell, and Guthrie's instincts kicked in. Something had shifted. He issued a quiet warning to the detective nearby. Be alert. Something was coming. Suddenly, Gray emerged from the front of the property. Anderson raised his weapon and shouted a challenge. In a flash, Gray ducked away, disappearing once more into the dark maze of homes and brush. But he wasn't retreating. He was hunting. Guthrie, crouched and watchful in the sand dunes beside a neighbor's small beachside cabin, froze as a shadow moved toward him. Out of the blackness, Gray appeared, his weapon ready, his silhouette barely visible against the darkness. Guthrie didn't hesitate. He stood and shouted, ordering him to surrender. He fired a warning shot into the night sky. For a moment, it worked. Don't shoot, Gray yelled. Guthrie's heart pounded. He thought maybe, just maybe, the nightmare was ending. But then, in a split second, everything shattered. Gray lifted his rifle and pulled the trigger again and again. One bullet found its mark, slamming into Guthrie's head. He dropped instantly. No final words, no second chance. His sacrifice would echo through the night. Minutes later, reinforcements thundered into the town. The Dunedin branch of the Armed Defender Squad arrived in force, sealing off Aramona with a roadblock positioned just 250 m from the only escape route. An armored car rolled in, its engine rumbling like a war machine. But even with backup pouring in from Christ Church, Timaru, and Invergil, one truth was clear. This man wasn't just armed. He had a scoped rifle and he had already killed far too many. There would be no more warnings. The order was given. Shoot on sight. No hesitation, no negotiations. The hunt was on. The man responsible was still on the loose, armed, unpredictable, and hidden. Somewhere among the ash, dunes, and cribs. It was clear to the authorities that this was no ordinary standoff. This was war. And now New Zealand was calling in its most elite warriors. Police Commissioner John Jameson gave the word. The Anti-Terrorist Squad, New Zealand's top-tier counter-terrorism unit, was to deploy. These were men trained for the worst-case scenario. And this, without question, was it. Back then, they were known simply as the ATS. Today, they're called the Special Tactics Group. But on that morning, they were just a handful of heavily trained operatives racing against time to stop the carnage. But even getting them to the fight wasn't simple. Scattered across Christchurch, Wellington, and Auckland, the ATS had no military transport available. So, they did the unthinkable. They boarded a commercial business flight before sunrise on November 14th. Each of them carrying a Heckler & Koch MP5 submachine gun. The sight of these black-clad operatives boarding a public flight raised eyebrows and created logistical nightmares. Commercial airliners weren't used to transporting men armed for urban warfare. But there was no time to wait. The mission came first. On board that plane were not just the operatives, but Police Minister John Banks, Commissioner Jameson himself, and Julie Holden, Gary Holden's daughter, who gave the man a detailed description of Aram Moana, its twisting paths, hidden cribs, and the man they were hunting. When the plane touched down in Dunedin, they were met with a sea of flashing cameras. Reporters swarmed the tarmac, but there was no time for answers. A bus was waiting, already struggling to navigate the packed roads leading into Port Chalmers. From there, local residents, still shaken and bloodied, briefed the ATS face to face, painting a clear picture of the town's layout and the horror Gray had unleashed. Next came the aerial assault. An RNZ-1 Hawkeye helicopter was dispatched to support the mission. At first, it soared high above the town because Gray had already fired at a private news chopper that morning. There was no guarantee he wouldn't try again, but eventually the Hawkeye dropped altitude, hovering low and slow over thick patches of bushland, carrying snipers and tactical units and raining tear gas grenades into the thicket below, trying to flush the killer out of whatever shadow he was hiding behind. Inside the bird, tension was high. The chopper crew flew non-stop for over 8 hours, circling, scanning, and inserting police snipers onto the surrounding hills like chess pieces. Every moment could bring a bullet. Every breath could be the last. But they pressed on. On the ground, the ATS moved as two squads, finally linking up with the TERO Armed Defender Squad, who had been holding key perimeter points throughout the night. Orders were issued loud and clear. No confusion. If he has a firearm, he is to be shot. No hesitation, no warning. But even as this high-stakes manhunt unfolded, Gray, the man who had torn a peaceful town apart, had wandered into a crib, helped himself to a quiet meal, and gone to sleep, unaware that the highest-ranked squad in the country was closing in, and the storm he had created was about to come crashing down. As the sun began to rise, Over the smoldering wreckage of Aramo on November 14, the nightmare still hadn't ended. At precisely 6 a.m., members of the Christchurch anti-terrorist squad slipped silently into the battered township, rifles drawn, boots crunching on broken glass and scorched debris. The morning was still, but it was a silence born of horror, one that blanketed the town like a fog. The street was littered with the unthinkable. The lifeless bodies of friends, neighbors, and children. Every step forward meant walking past tragedy. Their first destination was the epicenter of the bloodshed, Gray's house. With nerves taut and fingers on triggers, the ATS teams approached cautiously, covering each other as they cleared nearby homes, checking every corner, every shadow. When they reached the killer's house, the signal was given. A stunned grenade was tossed inside, erupting with a deafening blast that shattered windows and rocked the quiet neighborhood, followed by thick clouds of tear gas flooding through the broken frames. Seconds later, the door was kicked in, guns up, eyes scanning, but there was nothing. The house was empty. The man they had come for was gone. But his presence still clung to every wall, every floorboard, every inch of that cursed space. He had already vanished into the township again, slipping through the cracks like a phantom. The operation wasn't over. It was just beginning. The ATS pushed forward house by house, methodically sweeping the entire street, dividing into two squads, one on each side, checking every doorway, every closet, every attic. Reinforcements from the Armed Defenders Squad, Wanganui, Palmerston North, Napier, New Plymouth, now backed them from behind. This was a full-blown war zone, and the line of police now spanned across regions. In one garden, they stumbled upon something chilling. Sergeant Stoyart Guthrie's revolver abandoned in the grass, an eerie, silent reminder of the price already paid. Inside another home, a miracle. A woman had been hiding beneath a table for more than 20 hours, frozen in fear, unmoving, unheard. She emerged shaking, her survival defying all odds. But the real confrontation was still to come. Late into the day, the team came upon a small crib on the northeastern edge of town, one with a broken window flanked by thick hedges and a fiber light shed in the back. It seemed quiet, too quiet. Then, like a ghost flickering into view, Gray appeared at the window for just a split second. It was all the confirmation they needed. What followed was destructive. A stunned grenade was thrown through the window, but Gray had rigged the space inside. A mattress placed against the glass bounced the grenade back towards the police team, sending everyone diving for cover. Gas grenades followed. Plumes of tear gas billowed into the crib, curling through the hallways. Then the gunfire began. Gray, wild, and erratic began firing. Not directly at police, but out through the fiber-like shed behind the house. It was clear he was disoriented, unhinged. Maybe even trying to fake his movements or create a diversion. But the ATS wasn't backing down. They returned fire in full force. For 2 straight minutes, bullets flew in both directions, splintering wood, tearing through walls, and echoing across the hills. Inside, Gray paced, gun in hand, spraying bullets aimlessly, his shadow dancing between flashes of muzzle fire. A stray round made it through a crack and struck an ATS officer in the ankle. But the Team pressed on. They weren't letting him escape. Not this time. Above them, the Iroquois helicopter returned, roaring overhead and circling low. As light began to fade once more, and the second night of terror approached, the chopper hovered like a watchful eye, ensuring that if Gray tried to flee into the surrounding bush, he'd be met with force from above. The final showdown was near. The killer was cornered, and there was nowhere left to run. At approximately 5:50 p.m. on November 14, David Gray made his final move. He ran out of the crib where he had been hiding, firing his weapon from the hip and shouting, "Kill me! Effing! Kill me!" Before he could get far, officers from the anti-terrorist squad opened fire. Gray was struck 5 times, once in the eye, once in the neck, once in the chest, and twice in the groin. The gunfire brought him down, but even with such severe injuries, he continued to resist. On the ground, Gray fought against arrest. He broke free of the plastic handcuffs officers had initially used to restrain him, forcing them to resecure him as he continued to curse them for not having killed him outright. Despite his condition, he remained combative until the end. Ambulance personnel arrived on the scene and began treating Gray. They administered oxygen and attempted to stabilize him as they transported him toward Dunedin Hospital. However, he died from his injuries at 6:10 p.m. just a short distance outside Moana. Inside the crib where Gray had taken cover, police recovered a disturbing cache of weapons. Meanwhile, police displayed for the first time the deadly arsenal David Gray had amassed, including the semi-automatic AK-47 look-alike he used to such deadly effect on Wednesday night. Gray. Some of his lethal weapons, including the semi-automatic, claims the mass murderer didn't stand out amongst his customers. Throughout the course of the operation, police fired between 50 and 60 shots. More than 150 officers were involved in the effort to locate and stop Gray. When the dust settled, the toll was devastating. The bodies of Reva Bryson and Jasmine Holden were found in the charred remains of the Holden family home. In total, 14 people lost their lives, including Gray himself. The massacre left a deep scar on the nation and on the quiet community of Moana, forever changing the way New Zealand would view gun control and public safety. 14 lives were stolen, children, parents, neighbors, all in a single senseless act of violence carried out by a man who had slowly unraveled in plain sight. In the aftermath, New Zealand's gun laws were overhauled, its police tactics re-examined, and its collective innocence shattered. But long after the smoke cleared, and the headlines faded, one question remains painfully relevant. Not just for Moana, but for every society that has faced tragedy at the hands of one of its own. Story 6. In 2016, this small house on South Madison Street in Darlington, Indiana, became the setting for one of the most haunting crimes the state had ever seen. Brandy Worley sentenced for a chilling crime that horrified central Indiana. On the night of November 17, 2 children, 7-year-old Tyler and 3-year-old Charlie, were tucked into bed by their mother. Tyler had spent the day at school, still wearing the same clothes when he laid down to sleep. Charlie was curled up in her crib, wrapped in the same soft blanket she always clung to. Nothing about the evening seemed unusual, but by the next morning, both children were dead, and Their killer never left the home. In fact, she made the call herself. Darlington. Hey, what's going on there? I shot myself and I killed 2 children. You shot yourself and killed your 2 children? Okay. And what's your name? Brandy Worley. Brandy what? Worley. Hours earlier, Brandy had walked into a local Walmart and purchased a knife. Then she went home, fed the kids dinner and waited. Once everyone was asleep, she descended into methodical cruelty. She waited until Jason, her husband, had gone to sleep in the basement. Then she walked up the stairs with the knife hidden in her robe. In less than 10 minutes, both of their children had been killed, stabbed multiple times in their beds. When she was finished, Brandy turned the knife on herself. She stabbed her own neck, then picked up the phone and calmly dialed 911. And where are the children at? In my daughter's room on the floor. In your daughter's room on the floor. Okay. What's your phone number, Brandy? And what caused you to do this today? My husband wanted a divorce and wanted to take my kids. I want my husband and my kids. And how old are your children? Children 3. So the big question is, why would a mother do this just because of a divorce? And why with such calm detachment? To answer that question, let's go back to a time when everything looked picture perfect. No crime scene, just a quiet street in Darlington, Indiana, where the Worley family lived in a simple home on South Madison Street. Darlington wasn't the kind of place where tragedy was expected. Less than 900 people tucked just 40 minutes from Indianapolis, where everyone waved hello and nothing bad ever seemed to happen. Inside that home were 30-year-old Brandy, her husband Jason, 31, and their 2 children, 7-year-old Tyler Daniel Clinton Worley, and his little sister, 3-year-old Charlie Rose Jean Worley. From the outside, they were the definition of a happy young family. The kind people in town saw at school events and library visits, smiling, laughing. Normal. Tyler was the kind of kid every teacher loved. Born on September 17, 2009, he had just started first grade at Sugar Creek Elementary School. He was already obsessed with sports, basketball, football, soccer, baseball. If it involved running in a ball, Tyler wanted in. But he wasn't just athletic. He was thoughtful. He wanted to work with computers when he grew up, just like his dad. Jason once said Tyler was the kind of boy who could walk into a room full of strangers and walk out with 20 new friends. On the other hand, Charlie was born on September 26, 2013. At just 3 years old, she had a busier schedule than most adults. Preschool at the Wilson Early Learning Center, dance classes, basketball camp, and weekly trips to the local library. For story time. She loved dressing up, especially when someone braided her hair. Jason said she was a ball of light. In a tutu. Always on the go, always smiling. Now, Brandy and Jason had met in 2007. Fell in love quickly and got married in 2009, the same year Tyler was born. Jason worked as a software engineer, and Brandy stayed home to raise the kids. To their neighbors, the Worleys seemed completely normal. They attended school events, helped with dance rehearsals, and played in the yard. There were no fights in public, no calls to police, no signs that the perfect picture was slowly tearing at the edges. In fact, the day before the murders, November 16, 2016, had been nothing short of ordinary. It was a Thursday. Tyler had gone to school. Charlie had a dance performance that evening, and the whole family showed up to cheer her on. Afterward, they drove home, had dinner together, and wounded down like they always did. However, later that night, Brandy made a quick trip to Walmart to buy pipe cleaners for one of Tyler's school projects. The Walmart was just 11 minutes away in Crawfordsville. Brandy went alone. No one suspected that her shopping trip wasn't just for craft supplies. When she returned, the kids were winding down for bed. Brandy and Jason played with them for a while. Then Jason helped them settle into their blankets for the night. Tyler curled into his Spider-Man bedding. Charlie snuggled into her crib with her favorite blanket. But then Brandy said something strange. She asked Jason if he wanted to sleep on the couch, but he declined. He preferred to go down to the basement where he'd been sleeping recently. And this raises a question many people would later ask. Why wasn't Jason sleeping beside his wife? The truth is, like many couples, Brandy and Jason had been struggling. Arguments had become more frequent. But this wasn't just about bickering or stress. The problems ran deeper. In fact, Jason had just filed for divorce the day before. They had been together for 9 years, married for 7. But Jason had finally reached his breaking point. He believed Brandy had been cheating on him with their neighbor, and he had proof. Painful, undeniable proof. This wasn't just suspicion. This was betrayal confirmed through texts, photos, and late-night messages she thought he'd never see. Jason had noticed that Brandy became overly protective of her phone. She changed her password and kept it close. So using his skills as a software engineer, he installed monitoring software that let him view her messages. What he discovered crushed him. Brandy had been flirting in ing their 51-year-old neighbor. A man Jason thought was just a friend. One message stood out. I'm all covered in frosting. Want to lick it off? Jason wanted to believe it was a joke. Just Bry's twisted sense of humor. But soon he saw more graphic messages. Snapchat. Sent from the bathroom at work. Plans to meet up while Jason was away. He read them all. He watched their affair unfold in real time. The emotional damage was overwhelming that Jason turned to the internet for help. On Reddit under the username Jason in Hell, he shared his pain. His post titled, "I'm having a hard time coping with my wife cheating on me with our neighbor," went viral. In it, he detailed the betrayal, how Brandy denied everything until he showed her the evidence. Even then, she minimized it, claimed it was just a mistake, that it never went all the way, that it was his fault for being too busy at work. And then she threatened him. If he left her, she said he'd never see his kids again. She threatened to use his past mental health history, a self-harm attempt in high school, as ammunition in court. She said she'd prove him unfit. Jason was heartbroken, scared, and stuck. He didn't want to lose his kids, so he stayed for a while, but the resentment kept building. Eventually, he realized he couldn't pretend anymore. He didn't want his children growing up in a house filled with secrets and tension. So, he decided to leave. And that's when things took a dark, irreversible turn. Jason's next Reddit post said it all. Brandy refused counseling, refused to change. He had finally contacted an attorney. He said he was ready to get his kids out to start over. He thanked strangers online for giving him the courage. But no one, not Jason, not anyone reading those posts could have imagined what would happen next. Because the very next morning, his children were gone. Now, records show they found that 7-year-old Tyler and 3-year-old Charlie had deep cuts on their throats and that a combat-style knife was found in her daughter's bedroom. Police say Worley told them her husband was divorcing her and wanted custody of their children. They also say she specifically told them she did not want him to take the kids. Her husband tells police Worley yelled, "Now you can't take the kids from me," as he came upstairs to find the children. After the murders, a press conference was held. There was outrage, confusion, shock. The Montgomery County Sheriff addressed the public with trembling words. While the dispatcher kept Worley on the telephone, the first deputy arrived at the residence and confirmed that 2 children were in fact deceased at 4:43 a.m. Now, Brandy had been involved in a minor car accident once. But beyond that, nothing to prepare anyone for this. Jason returned to Reddit after the killings, writing again in grief. He said he felt like he had failed to protect his children. He shared how he returned to the house after the crime scene was cleaned, but he swore he could still smell the blood in Charlie's room. He wasn't sure if it was real or just trauma clinging to his senses. Either way, he knew he couldn't stay there. He packed his things and left. Jason questioned everything. Why had Brandy asked him to sleep on the couch that night? Did she plan to kill him, too? Could he have saved the kids if he'd stayed upstairs? Would things be different if he'd left earlier? Or if he'd stayed married? These are the kinds of questions that torment a father who did everything he thought he could but still lost everything. "I had one job," Jason later wrote. "A father's job is to protect his children, and I failed." He set up a GoFundMe to help with the funeral expenses. The campaign was shared by YouTuber Philip DeFranco, who discovered Jason's story on Reddit and used his massive platform to bring attention to the tragedy. Thanks to the support of viewers and readers across the internet, the fund raised enough to give Tyler and Charlie the farewell they deserved. But no amount of money could undo what had been done, and no amount of sympathy could answer the one question that still echoes through every post, every headline, every courtroom. Why? In a town as small and close-knit as Darlington, where everyone knew each other by name, grief spread like wildfire. Within days, the town organized a candlelight vigil at the local church. People came not just to mourn, but to try to understand how something so unthinkable had happened right in their midst. There weren't enough chairs. It was standing room only. 5 days after the murders, the funeral for Tyler and Charlie was held at the Darlington Community Center. Their tiny caskets were surrounded by flowers, stuffed animals, and handwritten letters. The children's mother, the woman who had taken their lives, was not there, but Jason was, and So was nearly everyone else in Darlington. Hundreds showed up, some in tears, others simply silent. A few brought candles, many brought memories, and every single one of them carried heartbreak. The Worley family released a statement during the funeral saying, "We are shocked and saddened by the sudden loss of our beloved Tyler and Charlie. They meant the world to our family and words cannot describe our feelings of devastation. We are thankful for the outpouring of support from our friends, family, and the community. We will grieve forever the loss of our precious little boy and girl." However, the case was far from over. 11 days after the murders, Brandy was finally released from the hospital. Her neck wound had healed enough, but she wasn't walking out to freedom. The moment she was stable enough to move, she was transferred directly to the Montgomery County Jail and charged with 2 counts of murder. Her bail was denied. Her defense attorney, Mark Inman, met with her shortly after. He said that in their first few meetings, Brandy showed emotion. She cried, but after that, something changed. She shut down. No more emotion, no explanations, just a blank stare. She refused to speak about what happened. Inman said he couldn't find any clear-cut reason for the murders, and Brandy wasn't offering one. Her behavior puzzled even her own legal team. Some believed it was trauma. Others thought it was coldness. The defense hinted they might pursue an insanity plea. But first, Brandy had to undergo a full psychiatric evaluation. The results weren't made public at the time, but prosecutors were already building a case that would dismantle any claim of mental instability. In fact, the more investigators dug, the more premeditated the crime looked. They discovered that on November 15, 2 days before the murders, Brandy had learned Jason was moving forward with divorce. He had contacted an attorney. He was ready to go, and she knew it. In the days leading to the murder, she kept things deceptively normal. She took the kids out with her mother. Jason came home from work, and the family went to Charlie's dance recital that evening. But what Brandy did next exposed her true intentions. That night, she told Jason she needed to buy pipe cleaners for a school project. But she lied. That trip to Walmart was not about craft supplies. It was a cover. Surveillance footage and receipts revealed that she had bought a KBAR combat knife, the kind used by the United States Marine Corps. Not a kitchen knife, not something from a dollar aisle, a weapon designed for combat. When she came home, she hid the knife in Tyler's room. Jason tucked the kids into bed. He went downstairs to the basement. The house went quiet and then Brandy made her move. She walked into Tyler's room, took out the knife, and woke him up gently, not with fear, not with rage, but with a lie. She asked him if he wanted to have a sleepover in his little sister's room. Being 7 years old, Tyler was probably excited. A midweek sleepover meant breaking the rules, something fun, something special. He had no idea what was coming. Brandy led Tyler into Charlie's room. And once both children were together, she began to stab her son first. He likely screamed. Maybe tried to run, but Charlie, only 3, heard something and asked what was happening. Brandy told her to go back to sleep. She did. She trusted her mother. Once Tyler was gone, Brandy turned the knife on Charlie. The details of the attack were described as overkill by the prosecution. There was no mercy. No hesitation, just brutality. When it was over, Brandy stabbed herself in the neck, then calmly called 911 and told the dispatcher what she had done. Before the case ever reached trial, Brandy changed her plea to guilty. There would be no courtroom drama, no jury to convince. The only thing left was sentencing and a chance for Jason to speak. The court asked Jason what kind of sentence he believed Brandy should get. He didn't give a long statement. He didn't cry. He just said, "I never want to see her again." Out of sight, out of mind. The judge, Harry Sulmaz, asked Brandy directly if she had anything to say, any explanation, any apology. She said nothing. She didn't cry. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't even look at Jason. And the court took that silence as her final act of cruelty. Brandy Worley was sentenced to 65 years for the murder of Charlie and 55 years for Tyler. 120 years total. No possibility of parole. The sentences would run consecutively at Rockville Correctional Facility. Judge Sulma said, "Everyone wants to know why. Why would a mother kill her children, but sometimes there is no explanation. Sometimes darkness exists in the world and it finds its way into people's hearts." After the trial, Jason said that hearing Brandy talk about the murders on the 911 call and later to police like she was describing a grocery list, was the most painful part of it all. She never showed any emotion, never even seemed to understand what she'd done. He said, "I just want to move forward. I want to protect the memory of my kids." As of 2025, Brandy Worley remains locked away inside the cold, gray walls of the Indiana Women's Prison. She's not a mother anymore, not a wife, not even a name that brings comfort to anyone. She's a number, a ghost of the woman who once rocked her children to sleep and later stole their last breaths. Inmates who've crossed paths with her say she barely speaks. She doesn't cry. She doesn't scream. She simply exists quiet, unemotional, like she's detached from the reality of what she did. She eats when she's told, moves when she's told, and when her name is called for mandatory therapy or evaluations. She shows up and offers almost nothing. Her most recent psychiatric evaluation diagnosed her with major depressive disorder. But to the outside world, that doesn't matter anymore. No diagnosis can explain away what she did. No label can soften the fact that she murdered her 2 children with a knife she bought for that very purpose. The world didn't need a psychological report to know that something inside Brandy was broken far beyond repair. Meanwhile, Jason Worley, the man Brandy tried to emotionally destroy before physically destroying their family, is still standing. He's older now, in his early 40s. He moved away from Darlington long ago and started over in a different city. He remarried. He has more children. And although photos show a man smiling beside his new family, those closest to him say grief still lives in his eyes just below the surface. Jason never became a public figure. He never gave lengthy interviews or tried to spin his story for attention. He just kept living quietly day by day. But online, in the same Reddit threads where he once opened up about Bry's betrayal, he's made a few rare appearances. In one heartbreaking post, he admitted that he still tortures himself over that night. Over the moment. Brandy asked him to sleep on the couch and he chose the basement instead. He wonders if that was her test. If she wanted him upstairs to stop her, or worse, if she wanted to kill him, too. He'll never know. But the part that breaks people the most isn't what happened. It's what should have happened instead. If that night had gone differently, if Brandy had just left like most people do during a divorce, Tyler and Charlie would still be alive. Tyler would be 15 now. He'd be in high school, probably obsessed with football and video games, maybe teaching himself how to code. He was sharp, curious, always asking how things worked. Jason used to say Tyler could charm anyone. He'd make friends at the grocery store. He had that glow, that natural warmth you can't teach. Charlie would be 11. She'd be in middle school, maybe still wearing sparkly sneakers and asking for glitter in her hair. She loved dance class, loved story time. She had this way of making people smile without saying a word. She was the kind of child who sang to herself when no one was watching, and always wanted to help with the dishes, even when she wasn't tall enough to reach the sink. But instead of growing up, their names are carved in stone. Their birthdays are remembered with candles and tears, not balloons, and laughter. The rooms that once echoed with their voices are silent now. Photos are all that remain. Pictures frozen in time of two kids who never had the chance to become who they were meant to be. The Reddit community that once stood by Jason offering advice, cheering him on as he tried to leave a toxic marriage, was devastated when the truth came out. They hadn't just followed a story about infidelity. They had watched unknowingly as a double homicide unfolded in real time. Some users felt guilty. Some wondered if encouraging Jason to leave had pushed Brandy too far. But none of this was their fault, and it wasn't Jason's either. As the rain gently falls and the night grows deeper, thank you for joining me here at Mr. Nightcared. True crime stories remind us of life's mysteries and the importance of staying aware, even as we seek comfort in the quiet of the night. Let the rain carry you to a peaceful sleep. And until we meet again, stay safe, stay curious, and let the night watch over you.